Good morning. This is Don.
Good morning, Don.
Hey, morning.
I'm awake.
Yeah, it's early for you guys over there.
It's so early.
So-
I'm actually central, so I shouldn't complain. It's 9:40.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a little early still.
So we'll just wait for Tom to get on. We can do our sound check. We've already got some attendees in the audience, so those of you that are already here, you're gonna get a behind-the-scenes sneak peek at radio production, which is way more involved than I ever thought.
The details.
Yeah. So we'll just hang out and wait for Tom.
Is this the first day of the summit or the second?
The third.
Third. Holy.
Yes. Which is
Today is Thursday, huh? I thought today was Wednesday.
This week flew by. We had some really great sessions yesterday. Yeah, and next year we're gonna have a tribal focus again. So I'm really excited because we just had some great conversations this time around. So I'm just really excited to continue that.
That's cool. You guys are doing a lot of innovative stuff with this Debunked podcast live and then the summit. It's a lot of good stuff happening.
Yeah, I'm ready for a nap.
I believe it. There's a lot of moving parts to that, all those elements.
For sure.
I was exchanging texts with Maria and Josh this morning, so they should be good.
Thanks so much for arranging that.
Yeah, thanks for the flexibility to get some folks on there. Yeah. I've worked with them for a while, so we know each other pretty well.
Well, Maria, Jameen, and I had a fantastic conversation. So I just, wow, she's amazing. She's probably going to talk about allies versus co-conspirators, which I love that frame, and I think it's really important. It's an important message for people.
Yeah, for sure.
I see Tom Williams.
Hello, can you hear me as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Great. So we got, I see Katie, I see Don, at least at this point, right?
Great. Yep. Is this the same Tom that did the interview last time? I could put a
yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so you can put a face to the, highly disappointing, I'm sure, to put a face to the voice, yeah.
I really enjoyed that, Tom. I learned a lot of how you pace the interview and things, so I appreciate that.
That was fun, yeah. So for this one, I think we're planning on, I'll just do introductions and then have you take the first 2 or 3 questions, right? And then I'll take the next 2 or 3. We just kind of go back and forth like that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. And we can be flexible, we jump in kind of thing, but.
Hey, Don.
Hey.
Don, this is Fred, the engineer. I need you to back your audio level down on your end. You're completely overdriving everything.
All right. Let me know how that is.
Is that better? Okay, yeah. All right. Our production here says that's better, so that's good. Yeah, it was just really clipping. So thank you.
All right. I want to be clipping.
That's right. So, friend, just to make sure, we're not using microphone. I'm not using headphones. Everything's through Zoom.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing you need to know is when Emily's going to be coming back to you.
Right.
So that's your
right. So Don, that's another thing. So I sent out an email yesterday. So usually in our program we would take news from 1 past to 6 past. We won't do that today since that'd be kind of weird going away for 5 minutes during the conference. But we will need to take a couple of 1-minute breaks at about 20 past and 40 past. So we'll get to a natural stopping point at approximately 20 past. I'll just back introduce everybody and announce a break for our radio audience. And And then my producer Emily will do a break here of 1 minute length. So for the Zoom during that minute, I guess we'll just do whatever.
Sure.
Chat amongst ourselves informally, whatever, and then the same thing at about 40 past. And then we need to be done with this session by about 55 past, because we have a feature that runs at the end of the hour. So
Okay.
I'm gonna turn down your headphone volume because I'm hearing it slap.
oh, good. Turn that off.
So Tom, what I was thinking on the questions is the where do this myths come from? I can take that. How do you see the myth play out in your work? And there's some follow-up ones I could play in there.
Okay, let me go to the questions here.
Okay.
So say that again now that I have the questions in front of me.
Okay, let's see. There's the first couple questions. Where do you think this myths come from?
Yes. Yeah.
How do you see this myth play out in your work? I could take those, follow up, and then when you get specifically about homelessness and substance abuse disorder and harm reduction, and then the barriers one, I could follow up with that, and then maybe that's a good point. I can hand it to you for the some examples for positive partnerships and collaboration.
You have specific examples and stories, that one? Yeah, you bet.
And then you could take us home if you wanted to. What would you like to see happen to tackle this myth?
Let's see, let me scroll down a bit here. And then what would you like to see happen? Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay.
And like I say, if I'm in a flow, etc., asking questions and something occurs to you, just, I don't know, raise your hand or something and jump in. And
Okay.
I guess, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Same for me too.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's see. So let me.
If I could have you, Tom, move that computer just a little closer to you, so that way that microphone will pick you up just a little bit better.
Welcome,
Okay.
Josh. I see you there.
Okay.
Hey, Josh.
If you
Hi,
want to
Josh.
unmute yourself and say a couple of words so we can get your sound equalized.
All right, can you hear me?
Sure can. Keep talking.
Good morning. Good to see everyone. Sorry for getting on here a little bit late. Just catching up.
Oh, you're good. I think you're in an earlier time zone.
Yeah, Josh and I are in the same time zone.
Ah, nice.
Hour 15 minutes away. There's Maria. Dr. Treviso joined us.
You
All
see me?
right.
Now there we are.
See you.
Welcome.
It said, please register. I'm like, what?
Made a mistake.
What? Hey, Joshy.
Hey, good to hear you.
Good to hear you, see ya. Be part of the party.
We tricked him again.
Yeah.
I know. Here we are.
Drink Don's Kool-Aid.
Hmm.
It's tasty
Just
though.
show up. Just show up. It'll be fun.
It's always fun, Maria. We always have a good time.
I'm just kidding. It's just that at least it's not 5 a.m.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that.
Don't worry. I won't let us forget ever.
I'm sure. I'm glad you're not wearing a U of M hat, Josh. Thank you for
I
that.
took it off today.
Oh, that's good.
Look at you with your blue shirt. It's a good thing I didn't put my blue shirt on today.
And we had a core. You got time. You can go change.
It could happen. I have a lovely blue. I do. I fade into the background, don't I? What do you got a green screen there? You got a black?
Yeah, I got a tarp that's blocking my holy ceiling.
Whatever. I'm gonna put my phone on mute.
Because I made a joke that one time.
Yeah, man.
He's
Hurt
still
my
crying.
feelings.
Baby's still crying about it.
I was just joking.
Yeah, that's what
I
we
know,
heard.
and you.
It's all right.
Yeah, we'll be ready to go. So yeah, we're gonna have a good conversation.
Oh, I'm ready. I'm ready. Gosh darn it.
You guys got the question. So I think Tom and I will kind of go back and forth a little bit. Tom's gonna bring us in and intro us and then hand it to me for the first About 2 or 4 questions. There might be some follow-up, and then Tom is going to do the last few questions to take us home.
Right. You know,
And
I was going through my wardrobe of t-shirts. I swear to God. You know how you have your favorite shirts that get you excited, that always remind you of the good communities that we've worked with?
Mhm.
So this bad boy floats to the top this morning, and I don't think it's any mistake. And you've seen me wear this.
Is it the Opiate Summit one?
Well, no, it's one of many Opiate Summit ones. I don't know. Can you see it?
No. Bring it a little bit closer.
No, I can't tell. Oh, there we go. It's from a Gona that we did in 1994.
Oh, that's before I was born, Maria.
Shut up. In 1994, and it says 12th annual intertribal sobriety campout, gathering of Native Americans down at the bottom. And you know, sometimes people think that this is a new issue, and yet this really, to me, it's, you know, and this was one of the t-shirts that they, you know, gave out at that Gona. And
Still
it's
pretty
like,
good shape.
Yeah.
well, I used to wear it. I used to wear it all the time. Now, because the neck is all frayed and it's just hanging on by threads. But it really speaks to how long we've been in it. That was their 12th sobriety powwow. And that's when we did a Gona in conjunction with that, because they were smart. They were leveraging their powwow dollars and their Gona dollars.
Yeah.
To make it all happen together, right?
Yeah, that's what we got to do.
And so 12 on top of from 1994 to now, how long we've been doing the Gona. You know, people have been addressing these issues of mental health, substance abuse, food insecurity, housing, economic insecurity for hundreds of years. But it really, that shirt speaks to the resiliency of all of our communities. You know, and so I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm just really proud of us. I'm proud of this team, that what we get to do, you know, and that we have relatives that have busted the snow for us it was a lot harder back in the day to even have and fight about having a sober gathering. Why?
Yeah.
Do you have a problem with alcohol? No. Yes. Anyway.
Maria, and Josh, just let you know, to reiterate what Tom put in the email, there's going to be some breaks that we'll have to put in there. And natural, the 40, 20 past and 40 past. So
right.
Tom's a pro, so he'll beat us.
So those breaks will be a minute. So I'll just announce the break, and then for our radio audience, they'll hear the break, our sponsor announcements and such. For us here on the Zoom, it'll just be a minute of, I guess we can decide what we want to do in that minute. But
we can have a joke telling, keep it joke telling contest.
Yeah. So Don can tell us a 55-second story or whatever.
Make sure you cut us off, one of us.
And he'll go. Tom will be the pro, and he'll go. And we're back. We're live here with Tom.
Exactly.
I hate to
touch it. I'll say yes.
We're here with Don and Joshy and Maria.
And yeah, so when we go out and when we come back, I'll do reintroductions and such, and then just alert you, we need to be done with this session by 55 past, because we have a feature that runs on Thursdays for our radio audience at the end of the show. So
what are you saying? Gonna cut us off?
Yeah, we'll have to.
Giving you fair warning right now, Maria.
No worries. I have another conference call after this. So
yeah,
my day started already. So
hey, Don, you probably already have it, but your email shut off, right? So we don't get any alerts during it. That's been
I hope so.
Okay. I shut mine off, like just here and my phone too.
Oh, because Joshy's a pro. Hang on a second.
Yeah, you want to get ding ding. It's like, oh man, shut up.
Yeah, especially when I start coming in.
No, in fact, I have to turn my phone off because it starts ringing through the computer, which is like so lovely.
Apple problems.
There we go. Yep, we're good. Yeah, so we got
we do have attendees already online, so that's great. So
Awesome.
Yeah. Welcome,
Excellent.
folks.
Yeah.
I heard the summit's going really awesome. This is the third day. I was asking Katie, and I was like, "Oh, is this the second day or what?" And I was like, I was thinking today it was Tuesday or Wednesday.
Is that a virtual summit?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So
I just saw your text. Don't be that. Oh man. I'm so sure.
I seen them.
So sad.
saying you were the last one on. That's all I'm saying.
Whatever.
Someone has to be the last one on, so it's all right.
It's true. I like that positive reinforcement.
It's on
Or
TV
worthy stuff.
yesterday.
Hey, Jennifer, good to see you.
How's
got their
everybody today?
lungs? Well, finishing my third cup of coffee, so I should be live.
All wired.
You know,
It's almost Friday.
Whatever it
Friday
takes.
There's Miss Jennifer. Hey, they gave me quite the
Hey,
compliment
Maria.
the other day, Don.
oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
they
a
said, "Hey,
fan."
you think you stand up?" And I'm like, "Good idea."
It's true. You had me and Jameen rolling on the floor laughing. That was a great discussion. I didn't want it to end.
You know what's the sad part? It's unintended. It's a resiliency skill.
Wow. Teach me.
No, serious. You know, all the greats. Not that I am, but Red Fox,
Maria just put herself in the category of the Red Fox.
Yeah, not that I'm the greatest, but Red
No,
Fox.
I'm the greatest,
No,
but I'm
no.
up there.
All those people.
They talk about the oppressive situation. You learn from the, people out there
Yeah.
who role model resiliency and you mock what tries to kill you, right?
Yeah, think of Paul Mooney passed away. Well, he was one of my favorites.
No, and just like, we start learning on the playground, out in the fields, did that hurt? No, I'm okay. That didn't hurt.
Yeah, yeah. Laughter is a positive, is good medicine, as they say.
Oh, it does heal. And so does that little kiss on the boo-boo.
That's
Do that.
all right. I'm going to do a little intro to kick off the summit for our early bird attendees who are here. Some of you were here at like 30, which is amazing to me. So before we get started with today's program, which is going to be a live taping of Debunked with our partners at Utah Public Radio, we'd like to announce that all sessions of the summit are being recorded and some content may be reproduced or broadcast at a later time. If for any reason you wish to remain anonymous during the recording, please take the following actions now. Click the 3 dots in the upper right corner of your participant panel, choose change profile name and edit your name, and make sure your video is off by clicking the video icon in the bottom left corner of your screen. If your video is off, there will be a red diagonal line through the icon. If you need assistance with this, you can message me or Claire Warnick, and we would be happy to help you. So welcome back for our final day of the 2021 Intermountain Tribal and Rural Opioid Wellness Summit. This session is extra special. I'm really excited about it. We're airing a live episode of the Debunked podcast on today's Utah Public Radio Access Utah program. The Debunked podcast is hosted by Don Lyons and Tom Williams, and we have some extra special guests, Maria Treviso and Josh Schuyler, joining the conversation. I'll be the session moderator, Katie Zaman, and I will mostly be hanging out in the background. As a reminder, we encourage questions during the episode. We invite you to either use the raise hand function or type the question in the chat box. All participants will be automatically muted throughout the presentation, but I can turn on your mic if you have a question. So we're going to get started at like 9:01, I believe, right, Tom?
We'll start right at 9 o'clock, right at 20 seconds from now.
Oh, wonderful. I'm going to shut up and leave you guys alone.
Hey,
You must have the atomic clock there, Tom.
yeah, I do, yes. Very important for radio.
Me too.
Welcome now to Access Utah. I'm Tom Williams, and today we are presenting our second live episode of Debunked. It's the only Utah podcast combining evidence-based health practices with storytelling to challenge the stereotypes and debunk the myths about harm reduction, substance use disorders, and homelessness. And today we're broadcasting live from the 2021 Intermountain Tribal and Rural Opioid Wellness Summit. The title of this year's summit, Bringing Harm Reduction and Recovery to Recovery Communities. Today we are welcoming in Debunked host, Don Lyons. And so Don, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's good to be with you, and welcome everybody to the Opiate Summit and the Debunked Live podcast.
And we're welcoming in Josh Schuyler as well. Josh Schuyler, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Maria Treviso joins us. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
So today we're debunking the myth that Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups don't want to work together to solve social problems. So before I turn it over to Don to handle the first few questions, I want to get some introductions. So Don, why don't you go first? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. Bonjour, Ogma Beneshe, Anigum Nidonjaba, Malko Nidodum, Nishnabe, Minwa Honoshoni Dao. English name Don Lyons. I'm a citizen of the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, and also Bear Clan on that side, and Turtle Clan from Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk Nation. And calling in from my basement in East Lansing, Michigan, and I'm blessed to be the host for Debunked. And I also work closely with Josh and Maria in doing prevention and wellness work in Indian country. So that's me.
All right. Josh Schuyler, tell us a bit about yourself.
All right, my name is Josh Schuyler. I'm Oneida. I also live in Michigan, just outside Detroit. So been doing wellness work in Indian country for, well, all my life, but professionally for the last 10 plus years. Don and I go back 25, maybe 30 years in the community. Had the pleasure of working with Don and Maria for several years now doing this work. So thanks for having me. Looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Great. And Maria Treviso, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, Yahuimi Kuya, eres de Los Angeles, Treviso, on Isla Pueblo del Sur, Pura Pecha. Good day to everyone, all my relatives. I'm Isleta Pueblo on my daddy's side from one of the Pueblo tribes originally of New Mexico area, what is known as New Mexico. And then after the 1680 revolt, they took as hostages part of the tribe down to El Paso area. And on my mom's side, I'm Pura Pecha from the interior of Mexico.
Wonderful. And our audience will, I think, readily perceive that we are not in a central location. So the joys of technology. This year's Intermountain Tribal and Rural Opioid Wellness Summit is virtual. So that's has some advantages, some disadvantages, but a lot of advantages. So we can be in our areas where we're living and join each other online through Zoom. Including our radio audience here. So welcome to our radio audience. So Don Lyons, host of podcast, take it away. First few questions here.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, and welcome again, everybody. We look forward to have a good conversation. And knowing Josh and Maria, we can get right down to it in the conversation. So today, we're exploring the myth that Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks don't want to work together to solve problems. So let's start, at the first place and try to get a understanding of where do we think this myth comes from. So I want to go with Josh first, and then and mosey on to Maria. But Josh, where do you think this myth originated from or comes from?
Yeah, thinking of some ideas for this, and maybe it's just around misinformation. On both sides, misinformation from non-Indigenous groups, non-Indigenous communities, and also I guess the Indigenous community itself. I know here I mentioned living in Detroit. It's a variety of people who live here, and my family, community, a lot of tribal folks here, come from a diverse background that includes tribal and others. So I think that historically too, coming from tribal communities and knowing families around here, it's just something that there needs to be education and be able to raise that community readiness that this isn't an issue. We need to work together and rely on each other to do this work and support.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Maria, I'll ask you the same question. Where do you think this originated from?
Oh, well, you know me as a behavioralist, I'm looking at either people or animals. I like looking at my animals in the yard, and I go, oh, why are they doing that? You know, why is that animal? Or I didn't know they did that. But you asked a really good question. So it always has to go back to what was the origin? And I like what you say, Don, not what's wrong, because if we're looking at this myth, we're looking at what's wrong. So I like to look at what happened. And as a behavioralist, we're looking at what happened. So some of it let's go back. First contact. So we have history. What happened after first contact? Maybe not so good things, some good things. So there's a little mix, a little bitterness and a little sweetness there. So if the experience with us, with each other, is not so pleasant, there might be an issue of trust. Then so you have that. So if you have unhealthy behavior together, then it creates an environment, a situation, a history, an experience of not trusting. And then the other part is like, you know, part of it is not being seen. You know, there's probably some people on this call today that go, I didn't know there were still Indians here. There's Indians in the state. And then there's the other part where they go, really? What kind of Indian are you? And do you have a card? Can you say something in Indian for us? You know, and then you get to be that sacred Indian, and we see it in film and myth and stories and everything else, that you can be that magical Indian or that magical Black person, you know, the wise Indian or the person of color who is wise. And we see it on TV, and now with our Asian Kung Fu is popular again. So we have that wise Asian person. So it just gets passed around depending on who's being questioned at that point. So again, history, trauma. So we have to unpack some of that to be seen and to be invited into the conversation, and to have those conversations as we do in our work before we go forward. Because if we don't tell that story, then it's kind of like a secret in the background, and it can impede our relationship, because a good relationship, in my opinion, is based on trust, transparency, honesty, and willingness to even say the icky and difficult things. But I'd like to hear what else you have to say, Don.
Oh yeah, I think you hit a lot of good things. You and Josh both talked about it, and we explore this too. The idea that there's elements of history, right? And we understand sometimes that's his story, and it's not necessarily our story, being Indigenous folks.
Yeah.
And then it's my story, and we're all great storytellers. So being able to see each other's story is a big item. See each other's humanity. So thinking about, and you brought this up, and Josh, you brought it up too, the idea that this myth, it's kind of built in structural and systematic processes, right, that have been layered on over the generations. You know, it's not just something that came up in the 80s or the 90s. You know, this is something that has been built on since first contact. You know, we're talking 1400s.
Yep.
So there's a long history and layers there. So thinking about those layers that I know both you and Josh work through on the daily work that you get to do in Indian country.
Yes.
How does this myth impact your work, the work that you do with communities? And I know both of you work with Indigenous communities and also with non-Indigenous communities.
Right.
And there's points of contact. You've been facilitators in different areas to bridge those conversations and those relationships. So if you could just share with the folks here, you know, how does this myth impact, how has it, and how have you seen it impact the day-to-day operations of the work that you get to do? And if you have any examples, that would be great. So I'll go with Josh first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in history, I know it's affected my work. So just a background, Don, Maria, and we've worked and done some planning in communities, tribal communities, communities in Alaska, urban Indian populations. And a lot of that work was around planning and building a blueprint for how we're going to work in the community. So looking at behavioral health, medical, dental, the whole spectrum of care. And for many of those communities, partnerships were essential. Partnerships internally with tribe, other tribal entities, other people who serve as tribal members, but also outside. You know, we're talking, law enforcement, educational systems, other medical systems. Us here, consider myself an urban Indian. the partnerships with our local center, with the outside community, the city of Detroit, the county, the 7 local counties, were vital because we had our people spread out all across the state, all across our service area. So just thinking of how can we work together, how difficult it was at times, and how do we extend that, I guess, invitation, for you to come into our center, our community, and then for some of those organizations and structures to invite us in to be partners. It's oftentimes they'll give us a call and need some support. It oftentimes happens around November, where they want us to come into schools and speak to the stories, speak to the kids, and that's great. But really trying to create a seat at the table so we can be involved in planning, so they can see not all Indians look like X, Y, Z. There's many of us who are multicultural, many of us who are multi-tribal. So come in and learn, and we were able to do some good work. I know Maria, Don, myself, not just in the communities we live in, but some of the communities that we've supported, many of the communities we supported, we were able to come in, extend partnerships, and just have conversations. I've seen Maria and Don both masterfully facilitate conversations that communities and partners didn't think were possible. That's law enforcement with the outside of tribal communities and reservations, and saying, wow, we didn't know in 2 or 3 days of doing this work, we could look at the assets and resources in the communities and have a conversation and look to build on some pillars for the future. So I know that partnerships are vital. I know that it's possible. I've seen it happen, and it's been a great part to see, but I know there's still more work to be done with building those partnerships out in tribal communities, urban, rural, et cetera.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. You hit on a couple of points. I want to come back to you on the dynamics of urban and reservation, because there's some similarities and there's definitely some differences. So I want to pull on that strand in a second here, but I want to go to Maria. Maria, thinking about the work that you do, and you've been doing this, you're a wellness warrior and been doing this work for, in a good way, for a long time, and have mentored, myself included, and other people in doing this work. So thinking about this myth, indigenous and non-indigenous folks not wanting to work together to solve social justice issues. How does that impact the work that you do? How have you seen it played out in the day-to-day work that you've done?
Well, the thing is, there's a word called abolitionists. And back in the day, that term had been used for deconstructing the slavery model. And then the model of slavery is about stolen labor to work stolen land. And yet at a certain point, doctors, physicians, ministers, good people decided to put themselves on the line to deconstruct those systems. And they put themselves in jeopardy, because anybody that wanted to deconstruct those systems, it was punishable by death or a good beating. And so Dr. Bettina Love talks about co-conspirators, that we don't just need allies, that we need co-conspirators. And that's somebody who's willing to take a hit for you, to cash in on their whiteness, to cash in on their privilege, to take a hit for you. And we have several examples of that. At Standing Rock a while back, a young lady, I'm spacing out her name, Sophia Walensky, I think it was. She had the night shift watching the bridge that the protesters had taken, and they shot her and they blew up her arm. She was a co-conspirator. Instead of just standing there going, hey, they're going to shoot at us, you guys better get over here, she took a hit. When the A&E Church in Charleston, South Carolina, right after that young man, Mr. Roof, went in and killed all those people, there was a protest, and they knew it was going to have to be a woman of color. So they trained her how to climb the pole, and they had her bail ready. But on that day, a fella, I think his name was James Tyson, he and she were at the IHOP, and then they got the call, hey, we're going to take that Confederate flag down at the State House. At one point, they were trying to talk her down, and the cops said, well, we'll just tase the flagpole. That'll get her down. And at that moment, Mr. James Tyson went from being an ally to being a co-conspirator, because what he did was he put his hand on that flagpole. And he knew that they weren't going to tase that flagpole because they weren't going to tase a healthy white man. And I lay this out for you because you have to, at a certain point, you make a commitment that I'm going to not just show up at the meeting with all the buzzwords and to offer my sympathy, but when the work has to happen, I'm going to leave. That we need people that are invested for the long haul, not just with the buzzwords that they read the latest book and that they could try to out indigenize the indigenous population, because this isn't just an issue here in North America. We see the same issue in South America, Central America, and Australia, where you and I get to work. It's the same issue where there's love, depending on how brutal the colonization was, we have these same issues of substance abuse, mental health issues, marginalization, housing insecurity, food insecurity, economic insecurity. So it's about having partners who are willing to cash in on their privilege and their whiteness, because some people say that, and I love this analogy, that whiteness and privilege is like a bank, an ATM account that replenishes itself every day. So how do you cash out on that to help and to elevate others? So to be willing to put yourself on the line. So it's about cultivating putting, and I like how our teachers who helped design the curriculum that we work with, the Gathering of Native Americans, they used to say this one thing: check your ego at the door. Are you here to help, or are you here for the glory?
Right. Maria, I want to follow up with you on something before we go into the urban and reservation aspects of debunking this myth. So you hit on some really key areas, and that, a part of the healing process is, which I want to get to, we have to truth tell aspects of things, be able to be strong enough to truth tell and be strong enough to listen and hear, and then take that. I heard someone say that guilt is not a useful feeling. Absolutely. It's about empathy, because guilt makes it turn to you as a selfish way of thinking about, I'm guilty about this, and promoting empathy is about motivating you to have action, to do something about the work. So you hit on those areas, and about co-conspirators and allies, and there's layers to that. I also heard layers of being a family, that takes it to a different level than co-conspirators, seeing each other as family, and a part of this. So I wanted to, maybe Josh can jump into this too before we get to the urban and reservation differences, is that your role as facilitators, right? And I think that's a key role, that sometimes is we can't just sit down and have conversations. There needs to be a structure that's developed in a healthy, trauma-informed way. And the GONA, as you said, the Gathering of Native Americans, helps us develop those structures. But for folks out there that are, maybe they're non-Native, maybe they are Native, maybe they're not sure, could you just explain the importance of the role of a facilitator, being a healthy facilitator, for these critical conversations to happen? Some tips and some insight there. I'll start with Maria.
Oh, heavens. Well, part of it is to know that you have to trust that the community already has the answers. They already know the story. They already know what resiliency they have in the community. You have to trust that, as pitiful as some communities are, and I say pitiful, you have to remember we have over 500 years of marginalization, of colonization, of systems that need and are starting to be dismantled, that have marginalized people. The recent COVID highlighted the lack of infrastructure in some of our rural communities. They're saying, oh, you COVID, wash your hands and wash it with water for this many seconds. And you got communities that don't even have water. They don't have running water because it has to be trucked in for 30, 40, 50 miles for communities that don't even have the money for the gas to bring it in. Well, why don't they build a well? Because they don't have the electricity. And by the way, that water is contaminated because the federal government gave coal companies and uranium companies permission to come in and mine this stuff and left the water contaminated. So part of it is about re-examining the infrastructure, which is the topic du jour right now. And that's part of it. So you have to take a look at it, but the most important thing is that the communities have the answers. They have the power, they have the language. And part of facilitation is realizing they are blessed with that and getting out of the way of that and let them tell their story.
100%, being able to reframe it and kind of understand that there's elements of truth telling, there's elements of resilience, there's elements of trauma, and being able to help navigate that and guide that in a lot of ways is an important role for a facilitator. To have those critical conversations, you just talk about the reality of the pollution and the not access to various things. That's a part of wellness. That's a part of harm reduction. That's a part of debunking this myth that we're talking about right now of Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups not wanting to work together. But I think we might have to take a quick break. So I'll pass it to Tom here.
Yes, thank you, Don. So just to reset the scene here, you're listening to Access Utah here on Utah Public Radio. And this is their second live episode of Debunked, which combines evidence-based health practices with storytelling to challenge the stereotypes, debunk the myths about harm reduction and substance use disorders and homelessness. And we're broadcasting live from the 2021 Intermountain Tribal and Rural Opioid Wellness Summit. We have with us Debunked host Don Lyons, also Josh Schuyler and Maria Trevizo. And so let's take a 1 minute break right now.
Cool. Yeah, good job, Josh and Maria. We're still with the audience from the Opiate.
Awesome.
I think the next part, I'll go back to you, Josh, and kind of jive on what Maria was sharing. And I think if we can dive into the diversity of the urban and reservation components.
Yeah.
I think that would be important for folks out there.
Hope I didn't take it sideways too much.
No, I think this is the conversation, right? Harm reduction is a part of it. It's a wide conversation that we got to have. And the next part, after we get back here in a couple seconds, I'll start narrowing it down around homelessness and harm reduction specifically as we go into it. So.
Okay, we have about 10 seconds.
All right.
So when we come back, I'll do a reintroduction. I just have one brief question before I hand it back to you, Don.
Okay.
Welcome back. You're listening to Access Utah on Utah Public Radio. I'm Tom Williams. I'm host of the program, and we're pleased to be bringing you a live episode of Debunked, the podcast. We're broadcasting from the 2021 Intermountain Tribal and Rural Opioid Wellness Summit. And we have with us Debunked host Don Lyons. We have with us Josh Schuyler and Maria Trevizo. And glad you're listening, whether by Zoom on the conference or over the radio and the various other means of listening to Utah Public Radio. Welcome to everybody. So Don, before I send it back to you for the next couple of questions, Maria Trevizo, you said something earlier that really caught my attention. We've been talking about it a little bit more before the break. You said we have to say, if I got it right, the icky and difficult things.
Mm-hmm.
We have to say those things. That's talking about the conversation that needs to happen. So I'll start with you, and I want to hear from everybody. What are some of those things? Difficult things, and then a follow-up question. How do we have that conversation? Because that's as demonstrated in just life today, it's difficult to have those conversations.
It's about context. It's about context, and my colleagues, and I'm glad that they're here, but we've been fortunate to be the recipients, the chosen, if you will. We have colleagues and friends that are much more brilliant than ourselves and who were assessing the situation years ago. And they looked around the community, and when there was a lot of community mobilization that was happening in the late 80s and 90s. And so from DC, and this went out to everybody across the nation, long story short, it wasn't working. And then, and I like your question, Tom, they asked them, why isn't this working? Why isn't it working in the African-American community, the Pacific Islander community, the Latino community, the Indian community? And one brave soul said, it's too white. There's no culture in there. There's no language, there's no protocols, there's no stories. So then they went back, and each of the communities designed different programs, and actually they look very much alike. One of those sibling curriculums was the Gathering of Native Americans. So it's divided into 4 pillar pieces: belonging, where we examine the issues. What would a child need to know that they belong? What would they need to feel, right? This is just not an intellectual exercise. What do you need to feel? So once we've established that with a group, then we can tell the story, what you just said. How do we have that story? But we can't dive into the difficult, horrific story of how we got here without having a safety net. And then during that first day, we talk about our blessings. What is our resiliency? And as we go through these components, belonging, mastery, where we tell these hard and difficult stories, and those stories include genocide, violence of different nature, the quartering of people, murder, Gatling guns taken into camps to murder women and children when the government knew that the men were away, the hanging of 30-something people the day after Christmas, the biggest mass execution of people because they were out. You want to talk about food insecurity? They were out gathering food for their people because the government had abrogated its responsibility on the treaties that they had signed to feed the people. They abrogated their responsibility on those treaties under Lincoln. And then when those men went out to go get food, they were off the reservation. And that's part of, what's the little cuts that kill us? When you hear somebody say, oh, they're off the reservation. They went off the reservation. Or let's hold down the fort. That language harkens back to that time where you had to keep the savages in order. Who are you holding down the fort from? You went off the reservation without permission to go feed your people, and then you get hung for it? That's part of the legacy that we need to talk about. And Don said it well. You can't live in the guilt, but let's do something about it. Let's take that guilt and understand the situation. So in the GONA, we go from belonging, creating a sense of understanding and groundwork with some norms. We talk about the difficult things, and then seeing how are we going to work together through interdependence, and then bringing it home. What am I going to do? What are we going to do together to help our communities flourish and to go forward and start finally addressing those plans of community mobilization, but not as us, them, but as healthy communities together. Because, and Josh, you said it earlier, a lot of us are blended. A lot of us, our families were white, we're black, we're yellow, and it's like the colors. And, I'm gonna pull it out here real quick for those of us who are on Zoom. One of the things that we have, and you see it in our drums and our shirts, it's these 4 sacred colors: the white, the red, the yellow, and the black. And, one of our stories says that these colors are sacred because that's the colors of all the people. And once we remember that we can come together and do good in the name of whatever your higher power is. But we have to be able to talk about, yes, these things happen, and not just go, oh, that's ancient history. That's in the past. Why don't you get over it? Well, we can't get over it until we have a conversation. It's just like if you have a brother or sister or a partner or a husband or a wife or whatever, and they just want you to get over what happened, but you never talk about it, that's going to fester. And we know from medicine that if you don't take care of an infection or a cut, it festers, and then it goes systemic wide. Well, we have a systemic wide situation in our judicial systems, in our educational systems, in our economic systems, our unfair redlining that happens with banks and how land is transferred. And again, let me go back to that: stolen land, stolen labor. So until we address these icky, uncomfortable conversations and talking, I'm not making it up, I'm not saying it to make you feel uncomfortable, but to have a recognition. I want you to see me and what my ancestors went through and what I go through when you say, oh, they went off the reservation. Too many Indians, and it's in our conversation. So until we undo that, until we can have honest conversations about why that's offensive and historically jarring, it's hard to go forward. But if you're willing to walk with me through that, then you'll understand why I bristle at certain language, why I bristle at certain policies, and knowing that my own mother and my own dad had to obey signs that said no Indians allowed. Or that even in my own lifetime, I've gone into restaurants where I won't be served. In my own lifetime. And you hear about white supremacy in the thing. It's still there. There's certain stores in certain towns that they won't serve you. And that still happens today. So we need to be able to have that. Tom, bless your heart. And I mean that in a good way, in the best way possible, because we can't have honest conversations without having the difficult ones. So I thank you for that question.
Josh Schuyler, I'd be interested in your perspective. Thank you for that, Maria Treviso.
Mhm.
Your perspective, how do it, have you had experiences with this where you have been able to have productive conversations while, I guess, getting real and addressing these difficult things?
Yeah. So at the top of when I saw the planning for this podcast, I was thinking back to, I want to say 3 or 4 years back. Maria and I did some work in a community on the west side of the United States, I'll say. I got put in to help support Maria. And I remember when we got there, like, oh yeah, by the way, there's a lot of these difficult issues going on. There has been, domestic violence. There was a murder involving a police officer, or a shooting involving a police officer in the community, community violence, struggles with the mayor, the local from the tribe, and then the local community. There's just a lot of issues. Like, well, geez, didn't know this coming in. So we have the GONA, as Maria mentioned. It's probably the foundation to every training we do, with the belonging, the mastery, the independence, and generosity. I want to say we had 3 days or so, and we had police officers who came in and supported, the mayor who was there, tribal leadership who were there. And the GONA is an event. It's an intervention. It's a way to work together. And throughout that couple days, we had people coming up to us saying, oh, I didn't know this was happening, or I want to be, as Maria said, an ally or a co-conspirator. We were able to identify some of those people who existed in the community. And by the end of the training, we had some pillars to build off of. What's the next time we're going to continue to do this work? What are the next steps? So we were able to work with the tribal community, who were really struggling to address some of these issues, while also engaging some of those co-conspirators, the allies, and also build the readiness of some of those people who didn't know or mentioned they didn't know that these issues existed in the community. So that GONA was vital. It was, as I've been told, the GONA is a way for us to have difficult conversations. Not one time in there did anyone, raise their voice. No one stormed out. We had, great rules and boundaries and protections for everyone who were there. From the tribal people to the allies. It was great. Maria is a masterful facilitator, as I mentioned. And it was a good conversation. It was a lesson learned for me, because at the end of it, that wasn't it. It wasn't like we came in and changed the community and the world in 4 days. But what we did do was build on something and have something to build on in the future. And then we were able to engage again. I believe Maria went back out there to that community. That community is still in contact with us, Don, for this work that we do. So it wasn't as if we came in and waved a wand, but we were able to finally have difficult conversations, and through those conversations look to have some next steps and some possible solutions to build off of for that community, the allies, some of the co-conspirators, and some people in the communities who wanted change and wanted to address these things. Homelessness came up, missing and murdered Indigenous people, domestic violence, substance abuse, homelessness, all across the board. And those were some of the things we were able to cover and look at and have a slight vision for the future.
Thank you. So Don Lyons, before I turn back to you for the next couple of questions, I'm very interested in your perspective on this. How do we have those difficult conversations where we get real about it, right? But also productive.
Yeah, and that's a good way to put it, get real and productive. And there's a lot of points that Maria highlighted and Josh highlighted on there. The things I would add and layer to it is that we kind of know, if we're really honest about the conversation we had, there's structural racism, there's white supremacy, there's economic structures, there's systematic structures and systems that are in place. And so where my mind goes to is, okay, how do we do this in a productive way where we can see each other and hear each other and get us to a point that's one step towards something positive. And the processes that Maria have talked about and Josh just elaborate, great example of that it is possible to have these conversations. And I always think about when you go to the news, right, and they have this stuff that's going, especially now with George Floyd, and they say, oh, we got to have this conversation, then cuts to commercial break and they come back and they go on to another segment. And you're like, wait a minute, when are we going to have this conversation? Because I think people are naturally scared of this conversation, and I think an element of it is that we have to create some level of safety before we actually dive into these conversations. Josh talked about setting some norms up. How do we want to work together? How do we want to listen together? And once we establish those elements, I think, and having a strong facilitator to help guide that process is a way to operationalize these tough conversations and get us to a point where it's not a oppression Olympics. It's not guilt, it's not shaming or blaming, but it gets to us on the other side of truth telling, honoring, and embracing each other's story. That gets us closer to saying, what kind of world do we want to create that's something better to leave our kids? Because this work here, the honest truth is that these systems were created over generations, right? So one podcast series, one opiate summit, one training is not going to solve these issues. It might awake us and plant seeds for us, but if we're really about this work, we have to be generational in how we're thinking and how we're doing. So thinking about what we can do now to kind of change or challenge our assumptions that we all carry, to debunk these myths that we carry, that might help us for the future generations and create more space to have more dialogue that's productive, getting more productive and move us forward. So those are some of my thoughts on that.
Just to reset the scene, then we're debunking the myth on this live episode of Debunked. The myth that we're debunking is Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups don't want to work together to solve social problems. By the way, I just want to make clear for our listeners, GONA, we've referred to several times as Gathering of Native Americans, right? So,
right.
So Tom, the next couple of questions here.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, we tend to speak in acronyms sometimes. So I thank Katie for putting that out there and Tom for sharing that. So, for people who are just joining us, we get a lot of comments in there. They're appreciating the conversation, the honest dialogue. So it's great, and continue to put the comments in there. We've talked about some broad items when debunking the idea that Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities don't want to work together to solve issues, right? So we're looking at how can we debunk that? Why do we carry? We talked about why do we carry that myth? How has it manifest itself in the work that we're doing? And Maria did a great job talking, the historical context and the epigenetics of that, how it carries forward is an element. Josh gave some really good examples about, how these Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities do want to work together and how it's creating a safe structure for that to happen. What I want us to dive into here, if we can, and I'll look at Josh here for the first shot at this, is kind of get a little more specific. In our Indigenous way, there's intersectionality. That's a hot word, right? We're talking about intersectionality, but we know an Indigenous way of looking at the world, everything is always intersectionality. There's always the idea of that all my relations that we look at. If one thing's happening over here, it's happening over there. And Josh, and kind of taking that thread and think about, Debunk is looking at homelessness, harm reduction, and thinking about this myth. And I know you had in a prior life, you worked in homelessness. And I wanted you to share some of your experiences from that and how have you seen different systems work together and maybe specifically working with Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities and tackling homelessness?
Yeah, so years back, first starting out, I was a case manager for a homeless team here outside of Detroit and working in the city. I had a lot to learn because I had I guess, stereotypes of what homelessness meant, and working with a lot of those people who were in my caseload. I realized, wow, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. So they taught me a lot. Was able to build some partnerships and work and learn, and then translating into the Indigenous population and working in the city, but then also working on a lot of these projects. I realized how many Native people we have and people in general that were homeless in the communities and how little resources there were available to them. Don and I worked at a urban clinic and an urban center, but I've been privileged enough to work with tribes and other urban communities who shared that this was an issue. Homelessness was an issue, and how are they looking at addressing it? One community in particular, a few years back, they had a lot of homeless people who had co-occurring disorders, substance abuse, mental health. And they were working with law enforcement to train law enforcement to be able to actively engage with the community understand the indigenous population, because there's multiple tribes in that community, and then learn some skills for engagement and also what resources were available. You know, they had this large center that had behavioral health, medical, dental, etc. So they're able to kind of build a partnership. They had a planning grant, a planning project that allowed this to happen, but that was a huge aspect of their way of looking at stopping the incarceration of a lot of those indigenous people who came into the community, but also helping them get services or access services, whether it was substance abuse, mental health, medical, food, things like that. So they were able to have some town hall meetings and trainings and invite people to it. But I think they also had to have some difficult conversations, and it was kind of taking data and information, going to places like law enforcement, presenting it and showing them, like, look, you have this issue of engaging with our people and people who are, our clientele, our tribal people, indigenous people from the local reservations, but also who live here in the city. And you mentioned you've had this issue, and we have this issue of getting them, access to these services, traditional services, medical, behavioral health. How can we work together to make this happen? Now, they only had 3 years to do this, so they were able to, successfully start the conversation and start to have the difficult conversations of how they would engage with these communities.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I think we're right in time for another quick break. I'll pass it back to Tom here.
Thank you, Don. Just to reset the scene, we're broadcasting live from the 2021 Intermountain Tribal and Rural Opioid Wellness Summit. And today we are presenting a live episode of Debunked. That is a podcast which combines evidence-based health practices with storytelling to challenge the stereotypes and debunk the myths about harm reduction, substance use disorders, and homelessness. And we're talking with the podcast host, Don Lyons. We're also talking with Josh Schuyler and Maria Treviso. So let's take a break. We'll be right back.
All right. Great job, Josh and Maria. I wish we had another hour.
Oh, let's get into the thick of it.
We're just getting warmed up.
I know, we're just getting warmed up, but this is good. It's planting the seeds, and I know, and I appreciate everyone who's on the summit. There's great comments. I don't know, Josh and Maria, if you're checking those out. There's some I would figure peer-to-peer TA happening for folks out there.
Looks like our fans showed up. I don't know. I don't know what kind of audience this is, but they're sharing a lot of love.
Yeah, allies and co-conspirators.
Yeah, I think people are thirsty for good dialogue, healthy dialogue that tackles, like Tom's question, how do we have this, but in a way that's productive, because there's a way to have it where it's not productive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that happens too often.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I like the fact that when we do this work, we don't shame people. We just explain what's happened. It's not about shaming people or guilting them,
And we are back. We are, you're listening to Access Utah. I'm Tom Williams, and we are presenting a live episode of Debunked. It's a podcast which challenges stereotypes and debunks myths about harm reduction, substance abuse disorders, and homelessness. We're broadcasting live from the 2021 Intermountain Tribal and Rural Opioid Wellness Summit. And we have with us Josh Schuyler and Maria Treviso, and the Debunked host, Don Lyons. And we're debunking the myth Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups don't want to work together to solve social problems. So Don, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I'm going to go to Maria with this one. Josh did an awesome job of how do we explore debunking this myth where Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities don't want to work together, specifically on homelessness. So Maria, you can definitely add to that what Josh shared. And I also want you to help explore this idea of harm reduction, right? How does this, when non-Indigenous and Indigenous communities, the myth is that they don't want to work together to tackle harm reduction. How do we create safe space for people to meet them where they're at, and really support them in reduction of harm? So if you could share, Maria, from your experience, I know you have a background being a nurse, working in a hospital, working with communities, youth as a prevention coordinator, manager, and now the facilitator to the stars with doing GONA and doing work and international work at that. So if you could share, help us debunk this myth about harm reduction and how Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities do want to work together to tackle this issue.
When I think about that, it's part of it is about empowering people. In fact, there's a fabulous program going on right now in California. It's called SEED, and it's the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration Project, where they are giving people $500 each month. They in the demonstration project, they gave 125 people $500 a month, no strings attached. You know, because a lot of times we say, oh, we're gonna do that, we're gonna provide tiny houses for people, but here's the rules. We're gonna provide you mental health services, but here's the rules. We're gonna support you in this, but here's the rules. They gave them the money, debunking the myth that if you give people money, they're gonna use it for drugs or to hurt themselves. What they found is that that $500 allowed people to, one, they didn't just keep the money or just go blow it. They prioritized the money. And they actually even helped their neighbors. Oh, now they had enough to be able to help somebody else. They were able to advance and get full-time work because now they had money for gas or to fix that car or to not lose their housing situation when they get bumped up another $120. And when you don't have that money, so part of it is empowering people. And you got to remember that back in the day, we used to have hospitals to serve our mentally ill, people who were struggling with substance abuse. Yes, those systems, once they deregulated hospitals in California, and then those policies went national, and then with our friendship between then President Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, those systems of disenfranchising people went international. So the Commonwealth countries closed their hospitals, just like we did in the United States, just like we did in California. And I was there. I was there in 1971 when they gave people a little bag. Here's your pills. Have a good day. And a one-way ticket to a major city. In that case, it was Sacramento and LA and San Francisco and Oakland. And they did the same thing, Oregon and Washington, across the country. And there's one thing interesting about us as people. We want to be with our own kind, whatever that identity is. So it's no coincidence that we wound up having what I came to term asylum ghettos. So people would go by the Greyhound station downtown, and those people were disenfranchised. Homelessness is not new, but it was given a good head start in the 70s when they disenfranchised hospitals and threw people out. We need more demonstration projects where we support people, no strings attached. Here you go. Hopefully this helps you. But the Stockton project, that C project, is showing that people will not only help themselves, but they will help others and lift themselves out. And who would, you know, and if you come from a history of genocide and war and marginalization and unfair practices and systems that are against you, you know, I'm in recovery myself. So until you address those issues of mental illness and lack of recognition and being invisible and being part of that myth and that joke, you want to drink and you want to use. And I was that person. Until we have a system that addresses both mental health and substance abuse in a respectful way, we're going to have people that want to use and want to hurt themselves, because the thing is, I'm going to hurt myself before you hurt me. And if I do it by self-medicating, so that I don't have to feel the sting so deeply, I'm going to do that. But I'm lucky that today I have people like you, Don and Josh, and others that surround me, that I can maintain my sobriety and my wellness, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And we have to have systems in place to be our brother's keeper. And we have to reestablish those systems. I love the Stockton Project. I think we need to create centers, no strings attached, to help our relatives so they can help themselves.
Yeah, 100%, Maria. And that's someone talked about inclusion as part of harm reduction. I totally agree with that. And these are, you know, complex, but also very simple things that we could do, take steps towards harm reduction, meeting each other at, seeing each other. Yeah. And Maria, I want to go off just a little bit here of what you said and get both you and Josh to give some feedback in here. We got a few minutes left, and I want to give Tom the last question or two to wrap us up. We're almost at the top of the hour, which is amazing. I really appreciate this conversation. But Maria, you talked about it, and I think it talks about debunking this myth, right? That indigenous and non-indigenous groups don't want to work together. We've been exploring that, yeah, there is opportunities, and these communities do want to work together. And Josh gave great examples. You gave great examples. And I'm seeing the thread on our Zoom here, and it seems like that ally, co-conspirator, those layers of support have been resonating with folks on there on the chat. So I want to pull on that, and something you just said, Maria, and maybe you can have the first words on that. I'll pass to Josh here before we pass it back to Tom, is this idea of healing work that you mentioned, that we have to do our healing work, and no one can do it for us, right? So I can't do, Maria, I can't do your work, I can't do Josh's, but I can be a supporter for that. But ultimately, you have to do your healing work. And the reason I bring that up is about being a strong ally and co-conspirator. Can you speak to the importance for, if someone wants to be in those roles, how important it is for them to do their own healing work? Because I've seen it, misappropriation or appropriation of culture and identity. So can you speak to it real quick, Maria, and I'll pass it to Josh for his feedback, is why is it important for people who want to be allies and co-conspirator to do their own healing work?
And let me jump in just before you answer that. We've got about 3 minutes left in the broadcast today, so I'll ask you to be very brief on this.
All right, thanks, Tom.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Bottom line is, you can't give away what you don't have. And and if you're trying to help somebody else, but you're still so fractured that you're really broken yourself, it doesn't help. So everybody has an original kinship, if you will, to ceremony. So be authentic. That's it. Just be authentic. Find what works for you. Don't try to be pretending that you're something that you're not. And transparency and honesty. Again, do your own healing work before you try to help somebody else. Just like they say in the airlines, put your own mask first.
Thanks, Maria. I think we got 1 minute and 30 seconds left. I'll pass it to Josh to add there.
Yeah, perfect. Along the same lines that Maria said, just taking care of yourself. When I first got into this work as a case manager, I mentioned homelessness. My grandma was just worried that a lot of things I would encounter would be, harmful, or maybe draw me away from the work, or bring up things. I lost my parents when I was pretty young. But I had my grandma, I have my family, I have good people around me. I still do. So I continue to surround myself with people who have the same kind of goals and vision, Don, Maria, and others. And we do this work the best we can, and we support each other. Not every time we have planning calls and plan for things, we do support each other in the work and our personal lives and the things that we're doing. So it's important to ground yourself with people who have those same goals and visions, and learn from each other, and take healthy risks. And it's okay to make mistakes.
Oh, thanks, Josh. I think we're right at the time, Tom, and thanks, Maria and Josh, for your inspiration and words. I'll pass it back to Tom.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to end the conversation as well. So thanks, everyone. We just to remind folks that we are coming to you today on Access Utah Live from the 2021 Intermountain Tribal and Rural Opioid Wellness Summit. And this has been a live episode of Debunked, the podcast. We've been talking with Don Lyons, the host of the podcast. Don, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and thanks everyone for being here.
Maria Treviso has been with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and inviting me to the game.
And Josh Schuyler has joined us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for pronouncing my name right too. Appreciate it.
Very good. It was just random luck, I guess. I'm glad I got it right. And thanks everyone participating in the conference here. The conference goes on, I believe, through the day. And thanks for our listeners to Access Utah for listening today. Thanks, everyone.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed the live Debunked podcast session where Don and Tom debunked the myth Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups don't want to work together to solve social problems. I know I, for one, will be working on being a better co-conspirator and standing in solidarity with you. The Debunked podcast is the only Utah podcast combining evidence-based health practices with storytelling to challenge the stereotypes, debunk the myths about harm reduction, substance use disorders, and homelessness. You can find it on your favorite podcasting apps. Thank you so much, Tom, Don, Maria, and Josh for joining us today. We have a few minutes before the session ends. If anyone has any questions, I've really enjoyed the chat box with you all. Feel free to add your last minute comments and questions, and we will be transitioning to our next session shortly, which is on mental health, incarceration, and recovery in rural areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun, Tom. Yeah,
Thanks
Katie.
everybody. It was great to meet you all.
Yeah, it was great. It was good. I think Debunked, it's a blessing to be a host and be able to work with Katie and Jameen and the team to have these critical conversations. So just one space. So I'm glad. And it sounds like, and it looks like the people really enjoyed that too. So that feels good to be able to create that space. So thanks everyone for your energy and participation.
Any other questions from the participants or people that are joining us?
Everyone is just extremely grateful.
Give yourself a hug. Just be in here.
We're worthy. We're worthy.
Real quick, Don, work us through that.
Okay, so everyone do it on the camera. So go like this, out towards people, and you're worthy, you're worthy. Put it inside to you, say you're worthy.
I'm worthy,
It's
right?
complicated. That goes both ways. We're both worthy. Then put your hands up in the air, throw it around like you don't care, and say we're all worthy.
Yes.
Ah.
And then
'Cause we
gather
know-
some of that love. Gather some of
Yeah.
that love. Just give yourself a beautiful hug for being here.
Yeah, words have power.
Yes.
Yeah, we could have done Indian yoga. In the first session, I was talking about Tom about Indian pointing. So you got to watch out when you go to communities, either paying for lunch or you might get married. So you got to watch out where you're pointing.
Oh my gosh. What a great warm up to a fabulous day. Thank you again for having us here today.
Great. Thanks again, Josh, for not wearing U of M hat.
I know. I was gonna say that. I was gonna say, like, a Michigan State guy and a Michigan guy can get together. As long as you're not from Ohio State.
We're breaking barriers down left and right.
You guys are funny.
Yeah.
Rivalry over there.
Yeah, it's healthy. It's good.
We inspire each other to be our better selves.
Healthy teasing, somebody put in the chat.
So Katie, what's is it people jump onto this link for the next session at the top of the hour? Is that what's going to happen?
We're going to promote you guys from panelists and add our next set of panelists.
All right, then. Have a good day.
Yeah,
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Hello, Miss Jennifer.
Bye
Say hello to
now.
everybody else for me.
All
Suzanne.
right.
Oh my gosh, Claire.
Hello, welcome. Bye. I love
Bye.
it. Thank you.
All right. All right, Katie, I'm gonna jump off too. Reach out to me when we need to have another conversation. But it's been great. Thanks, everyone. See you, Jennifer. See you, Suzanne.
Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. Oh my gosh, I am still kind of overwhelmed from our last session. That was such a beautiful conversation. The wrong page of notes here, 1 second. So I would like to introduce to you our next panel, which is titled Mental Health, Incarceration, and Recovery. So we have two moderators joining us today, Dr. Erin Fanning Madden and Dr. Randy Williams. So let me introduce them first. Dr. Madden is a faculty member at the Department of Family Medicine and Public Health Sciences at Wayne State University. Her research explores healthcare access among marginalized populations, so people of color, tribal communities, low income, and rural populations. She also studies substance use, harm reduction, and social factors affecting healthcare for people who use drugs. She has published research on primary care programs for people with co-occurring mental and substance use disorders, racial and ethnic differences in naloxone prescriptions, stigma related to substance use and harm reduction, and professional attitudes towards medications for opioid use disorders. Dr. Madden also specializes in interdisciplinary, qualitative, and mixed methods research and community engaged research. Thank you for joining us, Erin. And then Dr. Randy Williams is a folklorist and ethnographer, and she is emerita faculty at USU, where she has served as the Fife Folklore Archives curator and oral history specialist at USU Libraries for 26 years, and she was affiliated with the folklore program faculty. Dr. Williams partners with community scholars to ethically collect, preserve, and present the voices of excluded communities. She was project director of Voices from Drug Court, Cache Valley Drug Court Oral History Project, that was in 2017, and a co-director and PI of Informing the National Narrative, Stories of Utah's Opioid Crisis, which is an oral history effort. Williams currently serves on the Utah Humanities Board of Trustees and as board vice president for Cache Refugee and Immigrant Connection. Welcome, Dr. Williams. Now I would like to introduce our panelists for the mental health, incarceration, and recovery discussion. We've got Duchesne County Sheriff Travis Tucker, Donovan Bergstrom from the Office of Youth Services and the Utah Juvenile Justice Services Division, and Jolynn Palmer, who is a probation supervisor with Utah's 3rd District Juvenile Court, Vida Betts, Carbon County Adult Probation and Parole, and Sheriff Steve Labrum of Uintah County. So let me just read their bios really quick. It's a lot of me reading, I'm very sorry. Sheriff Travis Tucker has over 25 years of experience in law enforcement. He started his career in 1995 as a correctional deputy, and he has worked as a patrolman, detective, lieutenant detective, chief deputy, and is currently serving his first term as the Duchesne County Sheriff. Sheriff Tucker currently sits on the Utah Sheriff Association Executive Board, and he's the director of the UB Tech Police Academy. Donovan Bergstrom is the program director for the Office of Youth Services at the Utah Division of Juvenile Justice Services. He oversees the secure detention facilities, alternatives to detention programs, youth services centers, and programs throughout the state of Utah. Donovan has worked with at-risk youth for 26 years. He started his career in Madison, Wisconsin, hey Madison, volunteering in a detention classroom and teen suicide hotline receiving center during college. In 1994, he moved to Utah and worked in the private sector for 4 years as a program manager. In 1998, he began working for JJS, Juvenile Justice Services, and held the following positions: counselor, senior counselor, supervisor, assistant program director, and program director. He received his BA degree in psychology and criminal justice from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and his Master of Public Administration from the University of Utah. Jolynn Palmer graduated from the University of Utah with a bachelor's degree in human development and family studies, and she has worked in the juvenile court for 22 years, and she still learns something new about her job every day. Jolynn is inspired by and loves working with the teenage population. And then Vida Betts. She started her career in 2003 working as a med tech at the Utah State Prison in Draper. She transferred to adult probation and parole in Roosevelt, Utah in 2005 and worked there until 2018. In 2008, Vida was promoted to supervisor and was instrumental in starting the Treatment Resource Center. Vida was part of several communities whose main focuses was getting treatment to those in need, with a focus on women in the criminal justice system. She transferred to Carbon County in 2018, where she continues to be involved in the community and in supportive treatment. And then last but not least, we've got Sheriff Labrum. He's been in law enforcement for approximately 26 years. Currently, he's the sheriff of Uintah County. He previously worked for Vernal City Police, Uintah County's Sheriff's Office, and the Logan City Police Department. During his career, he has served as a supervisor, a detective, a SWAT leader, a SWAT team entry member, and sniper, motorcycle officer, bicycle officer, SRO, CIT, I'm sorry, I don't know what those acronyms mean, a child abuse task force, and many other committees and task force positions. Sheriff Labrum attended college at Weber State University and USU and studied criminal justice and sociology. So thank you, Sheriff Tucker, Donovan, Jolynn, Vida, Sheriff Labrum for joining us. And I will hand it over to our moderators.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. The theme of this summit, so I'll kick us off. The theme of the summit is bridging harm reduction and recovery in rural communities. And sometimes there's sort of a tension between recovery services that focus on abstinence from drugs and harm reduction services, because harm reduction focuses on reducing the negative effects of substance use for people who are generally unwilling or maybe unable to stop using drugs, and includes services like syringe distribution or syringe exchange, naloxone training. And the criminal justice system generally requires abstinence from drugs for people under supervision. So it kind of makes it unclear whether harm reduction and the criminal justice system can work together. So today we're going to be talking about that a little bit. We wanted to start by asking, how do you define harm reduction? And we were hoping to kick it off with Jolynn Palmer. Would you mind providing the first answer? So how would you define harm reduction?
Hi there. I'm happy to be here today, by the way. Thank you for asking me. As I've been preparing for this and kind of looking at different things, I feel like that my definition of harm reduction has expanded a little bit. As Aaron had discussed, the harm reduction we typically think of is the needle exchanges and that sort of thing. But I feel like harm reduction can also be expanded into ensuring that people have the therapeutic services and interventions that they need as well. And so that's where I've kind of expanded my knowledge a little bit. And I know that the juvenile courts have been very focused on trying to ensure that the kids are getting that piece as well, to hit the mental health and making sure that if they come to the juvenile court for drug-related issues or for whatever related issues, we want them to leave the courts better than when they came. And so anyway, for me, for the definition of harm reduction has increased for me a little bit, because I think it's great to add in that therapeutic piece.
Thank you so much, Jolynn. We wanted to invite if any of the other panelists would like to add, Donovan or Vida.
Yeah, I'd like to, to talk about the way I see, harm reduction, and I view this really as having two key components to it. The first is maybe the reduction of risk for the clients, and also the increasing of the protective measures. And then the second part is more of that system approach, not to cause more harm, to the client. And with juveniles in our juveniles clients in our juvenile justice system, we have to address the behavior, hold accountable, and also have that relationship-based approach. With juveniles, you could have the best programming to reduce harm, but if you don't have that relationship, it is not going to work with that youth. And I'm a strong believer in the procedural justice approach with juveniles, with the emphasis on respect, trust, voice, and neutrality. And I think those are, key things, to be mindful of when we're working with our youth. And then on the system side, I strongly believe that we have to take a developmental approach with our juveniles based in science. So recently we've had new research about adolescent brain development and how that impacts the teaching of kids, and also, how to hold them accountable. And I think we also have to focus on, not pushing kids into the system, because we do know that when youth go further into the system, their outcomes are not as good as if we can keep them back in their communities and providing services in the least restrictive setting. So those are kind of the two areas I really look at on that harm reduction topic.
Thank you, Donovan. Kind of following up on Aaron's question, and I'm going to maybe throw this first question out to Sheriff Travis Tucker, and then others who might want to answer. What role, if any, can harm reduction approaches and services have in drug court and a larger criminal justice system? Sheriff Tucker, do you want to answer that or respond?
I will excuse kind of how we're at here. We're hiding out in a little bit of a motel here. Harm reduction in our jail, we don't have a jail court. So as far as adults go, our harm reduction is trying to hook them up with mental health programs and hook them up with those doctors while they're in jail, while they're receptive, and kind of giving that soft handoff to Northeastern Counseling as they leave. Some of the programs that we have in jail, with our jail, we usually get them, we try to clean them up, we try to get them thinking better, and then they end up going out of jail, and we really don't have any way to monitor them after that.
Thank you. I'm going to open that question up to everyone, but I'm going to add a little bit to it. Do you think it's possible for harm reduction recovery and recovery to be both embraced by the criminal justice system to help people in rural communities who are in different stages of recovery?
I think that it's absolutely possible that we can work together, but it takes give and take on our part and on the part of the harm reduction, the programming too, because we are hold people accountable. Our mission is to hold people accountable and to help them get clean. Where theirs might be a little different, but it just takes working together, good communication, and a little bit of give and take in that process.
Thank you, Vida. Does anybody else have any insights?
Yeah, Vida, I agree with what you said here, and of course, we can make a difference here, and recovery is a journey, and there's going to be ups and downs, and I think as a system, we need to meet the clients where they're at in their journey and help them move through the stages of change that they're going to go through, and just know that they're going to slip. They're going to slip back, and we need to be there to hold them accountable, but also to support them to get back to where they were before and to just move through the recovery process.
Donovan, thank you. One thing that Aaron and I also just would like to throw out to everybody, we have 117 people on this session. And another voice of the session would be people themselves in recovery, people who are moving through these systems. And so toward the end of the panel conversation, we'd love to open it up to you. And if you want to write some things in the chat, we'd also like to hear your experiences as well. I'll throw the baton back to Aaron for our next question. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Randy. So we also wanted to ask what services are available to youth and families that are affected by substance use disorders that are provided by your agency. So what are some of the services available that y'all are working on and are providing youth and families? So we can start with Donovan. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Erin. And you know, for kids who are in JJS custody, we have you know, a wide array of programs, out-of-home programs, group homes, treatment facilities. But my focus today was really talking about our youth services model. So what services are available pre-custody? So youth in the community and families in the community who are struggling. And a big part of the juvenile justice reform that has been going on in the state of Utah over the last 4 years has been our youth services model. And our youth services model is available in all judicial districts and also all 29 counties throughout the state. And our goal is to prevent youth from coming into custody. And how we define custody is both DCFS custody or JJS custody, or the formal probation, you know, with the juvenile court. And there's 4 key components to our youth services model. So we have the initial intake and screening for all clients who are referred to us. We have an assessment phase where we're gathering more information on what the needs are for both the youth and the family, and also the strengths. You know, what are the strengths of the family that we can help incorporate into the plan? And then the third part is that youth and family plan, where, you know, we're procuring services for that family, and then we also have a follow-up phase. And all of these services are free to the families. And currently, we have 470 youth or families that are participating in our youth services model throughout the state. And, you know, this has been a big change because right now we only have 360 kids who are in JJS custody. And so we've been able to try to, with the juvenile justice reform, you know, try to provide those services to these front end youth. And, you know, our youth services model really has been a game changer in the system, because in the past, a family may not have been able to access services unless they came into DCFS custody, or they came into JJS custody, or they were referred to the juvenile court, and then we were able to access those services. So we have broken down those barriers now, and all of our families in the front end of our system have the same resources and providers that our custody youth have. And, you know, this really has been an important part of that juvenile justice reform.
That's wonderful to hear that those changes have been so effective. I also wanted to open it up to Jolynn or Vida or Sheriff Labrum if you wanted to add to this question, which I'll just say it again. What services are available to youth and families affected by substance use disorders that your agencies are providing?
I was just going to kind of echo what Donovan had talked about. At the juvenile courts, we also access their youth services program model, and we are able to send some of our youth there. With the juvenile court, we're not able to access residential treatment options for the youth. They would have to go to JJS custody for that kind of a service. Parent and the youth that we work with in the juvenile court are typically in their parents' custody. So at that point, if their parents have insurance, we would encourage their parents to make those treatment suggestions or treatment. They would need to look into some of those things for treatment for their children. And but then there are also different community things that we can reach out to. Third District Juvenile Court is Salt Lake, Summit, and Tooele counties. So we are very fortunate that we do have some programs that we can access. There are some county funded. There is a county funded residential drug treatment program that the parents, we can kind of point them in the direction, but the parents would still need to go through the processes of filling out the paperwork to get the kids there. We also have different, with Donovan's youth and the youth that I work with, we do a risk assessment for each youth that comes into our system. And then we are looking at recommending that those youth have services based upon their risk level. So if they're a moderate or a high risk, we're going to focus a little bit more on those youth and less on the kids that are low risk that come into our system. And so then with that risk assessment, we make recommendations on where their high risk areas are. Because sometimes even though a youth may have some drug issues, it might be secondary. Maybe we need to be more trauma focused. And our risk assessment, it's called every youth that comes into our court system gets a PSRA, which is a pre-screen risk assessment. And then if they are a moderate or high risk youth, then we go to a more in-depth risk assessment, which we call the PRA. And it's a risk assessment that we, Donovan's people at JJS use it, and the juvenile court people use it, the same risk assessments. We have the same system. And then from there, we're targeting the high risk areas. And they work to constantly validate that assessment so that we make sure that we are not causing further harm by recommending the wrong things.
That's wonderful, Jolynn. It's great to hear about the focus on trauma and that sometimes substance use is coming out of that, right? And it's not just a problem in and of itself. So that's wonderful. I'm going to pass it over to Randy for the next question.
Thank you, Jolynn and Donovan. I do want to look at our chat for a second, and I think you answered Jolynn Carroll's question. She asked, what risk assessment tools do you use? And I think you answered that, thank you. And I want to thank Floralina and Alonzo. They're talking about some of these things as well, the need for support groups and working with and youth services, some of the activities there. And I see someone, Floralina talked about addict athletes in service when it comes to some of these issues that we're talking about. So thank you for adding things to the chat and adding to the conversation. I think going along with what Jolynn was talking about, some of the support services, my question then to the group is, and it's kind of a little bit long, so I'll give the preamble a teeny bit. Substance use often affects multiple areas of an individual's life, as we all know, such as housing and employment and unemployment and access to healthcare. And I think during COVID-19 times, we've seen that being exacerbated. So my question, and I'll throw this to you, Vida, first, what efforts are criminal justice system agencies doing to help people with these issues? And then have these strategies been successful?
One of the advantages we have in the rural community compared to the urban areas, I think, is because we all work together. We're in a small community and we all work together. Housing works with us. DCJJ, they work with us. DCFS, we all have a contact there where we can just make a phone call and help work together so that we're not even doubling services. And so, I know here in our office here in Carbon County and Price, we recently have put together a program where we're going to be working with adult ed and our tech school here to help the people within our program that come into the criminal justice system. They don't have high school diploma, they don't have a GED, they don't have a tech, where we can refer them to get those services, and we can work together to support them, to encourage them. We've pulled in CCJJ so that we can have, a lot of our people have families and children. Now we're going to bring them into this program so we can have babysitting and childcare, because those are the obstacles. We find out what their obstacles are, and we know the people in our community who can help eliminate those obstacles. And that's really just working together and having those conversations and being support group to the individuals as well as each other in our community to bring them those services.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. The childcare, wow, that's incredible. I throw the question out to anyone else. What are you doing to help mitigate some of the concerns, housing, unemployment, childcare, and such?
I think I can add a little bit to this too, and I think it's especially important in the rural areas is that collaboration. I mean, there's a lot of times where there's not as robust services in some of our rural and frontier areas, and so that collaboration and that partnership with other agencies is critical, because we have to leverage what resources are available. I know for youth services, we've really tried to partner well with workforce services, to get those additional needs for the youth and the family and the caregiver, and we have to really be realistic. If a family doesn't have housing, they don't have food, that's going to be a priority for them before they start tackling other issues that they have. And so just knowing that we have to get, basic resources to help them get to a point where they can focus on the problematic behaviors that they have is key.
Thank you, Donovan. I want to go off of something you said at the very end, that deep work and the connections with kind of what you said, Vida, working together. We have a comment, and I'll just read this to all of us from Yvonne. And I don't know where Yvonne is. You might want to tell us, but or not. She says, "I wish there was an active services and treatment for adolescents in the area where I live. It is a serious issue. They have a mental issue. They have to go spend time in an ER." And she's in Minnesota, thank you. And the ER, which can be up to 6 hours, that causes more anxiety. They are waiting to get placement out of the area, and sometimes even out of the state facility for inpatient treatment. These places want parent involvement, and which is important. To have child placed so far away becomes a problem. Thank you, Yvonne. I agree with that statement. Does anyone on our panel want to talk about the waiting time for some of these services, and especially during COVID times, which has exacerbated that?
I think that can be very stressful. I mean, I grew up in a very tiny, small town in northern Utah, and we had nothing. Nothing mental health, nothing like medically. We had to drive 2 hours to go to do anything for a doctor or mental health or anything. And so it can be really stressful. And I do worry about when we have a youth that is placed, away from a family. Sometimes it's the only way that it can be, but it does cause a lot of anxiety, I know, for the child and for the parent. And I think Donovan kind of touched on this a couple of times, but it's so important for relationships and cultivating those relationships and working as a team to be able to help the child.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's Yvonne. It is very difficult in some of our rural areas in other states where it's several hours away, to the metropolitan places, usually for those inpatient hospital settings. One positive thing out of COVID during the pandemic, it's forced our system to utilize virtual platforms to, both provide mental health services kind of off, where we don't have clinicians, but also our family engagement in our facilities in juvenile justice services. And I think that is at least, one way where families can stay connected, where it's not just a phone call to the youth, but it's actually seeing them on, on a Zoom call or FaceTime. And we have actually increased our parent engagement in our kids who are in out-of-home placements during the pandemic, just based on virtual platforms for the youth and families.
Thank you, Donovan. I'm just going to.
So maybe that's the only positive thing about the pandemic that has come out.
Yeah, I think that's so true, that this virtual opportunity has allowed us all to be together as well, and to have a question from you, Yvonne, in Minnesota, that probably, unless we all got together or were, that's so true. Well, Susie Prevedel says that, and reminds us all that yesterday, there was a really great session that talked about the receiving center model in Davis County that is an incarceration diversion program for persons with substance use disorder and mental health situations. And so that might be something that folks might want to go back and take a look at that session. But I see people shaking their heads. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that or if we want to move to the next question, but that could be another thing that's important in this conversation. I'll throw it back to you, Erin.
Well, our next question is also about mental health anyway. So if you want to comment on the receiving center model and that's something you were present at, you can. Otherwise, we can just stick to the original question. So we wanted to ask, at times people who use drugs or people in recovery, right, suffer from mental health issues. So we wanted to ask, what mental health supports does your organization provide? And we were hoping to start with Sheriff Labrum, if you're there.
Well, in our jail setting, we have a doctor and several nurses that help out our folks that are incarcerated. Northeastern Counseling comes in on a regular basis, almost daily, to help us out with counseling for our inmates, and that's how we're addressing those issues. And obviously, the drug issue alongside of that, we have to get them sober before they want to speak to them, and so all that encompasses having the doctor and then Northeastern helping us out.
And how long have you been doing that?
I'm sorry, my phone locked up. What was that again?
That's okay. We wanted to ask, how long has that partnership been going on with the mental health providers, and how did you start that partnership?
Since I became sheriff, I sat down with Northeastern Counseling as soon as I got in, and we developed that partnership, and the county pays quite a bit of money into that organization, and so they help us out that way. And then we already had a physician at the jail and a couple nurses, so we got a few more nurses and our doctors, right in there elbow deep helping out with those issues as well.
Thank you. And I wanted to open it up to anyone else. So what mental health supports does your organization provide?
I wanted to just talk about a couple of things that we have, and these are all available statewide through the state of through the court system. But we there's a program called it's technically called aggression replacement therapy, ART. It can hit a whole host of troubled areas, and we've seen a lot of good things from the youth that have taken this class. It's 10 weeks, 3 times a week for an hour, and since the pandemic, we've had to do it virtually, which comes with some challenges with youth. But that's one thing that we're trying to give some tools to the kids. We're trying to increase the tools in their tool belts. And then another one that we just started going statewide, because we can do it virtually, is called Youth Crossroads. And it also is a program that we run for an hour and a half, 3 times a week. And then the moderate kids go for about 5 weeks and the high risk kids go for about 7 weeks. And we are doing it virtually, and it's the probation officers throughout the state that are doing it. I facilitate again in August, and I'm facilitating with a probation officer in Richfield, and I'm facilitating with a probation officer in Moab. And all of the kids can do it, and but they just have to be high or moderate risk. And so and those things are free to the families, and we provide incentives. Another thing that we've tried to do better with is in providing incentives, such as gift cards, or if the kids can just think of something like, this is kind of odd and random, but we had a kid that wanted circus peanuts, those little orange things you get at the gas station. That's all he wanted was circus peanuts. So anyway, we were able to provide that. So, I mean, we have gift cards, we have Gatorades. We've mostly just been doing gift cards since the pandemic, but yeah, so I just wanted to kind of put out those 2 programs as well.
Great. And then Vida, you unmuted. Did you want to add some information about the mental health services you're providing?
Yeah, we have an on-site therapist that deals with mental health as well as substance abuse issues. But the thing is substance abuse, when you're using, and mental health issues, those symptoms are often overlapping. They're so close to, some of them are so much the same that you need to provide your staff, your agents, your officers with training to help identify those. And so we try to make sure that all of our staff have the training to help identify those, so that we're providing the right services at the right time.
Great, thank you. And I'll hand it over to, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another thing. You know, besides our traditional interventions that we have, we also have for the Office of Youth Services an option of a peer support. And this is somebody who has lived experience. So this could be somebody who struggled with mental health issues themselves, or with a child, substance abuse issues, or even been part of the child welfare system or juvenile justice system. And we have a peer support that can be for the youth or for the caregiver. And their role is really to help them navigate the system, increase their informal supports network, and then also just to give voice for the youth and in the family in the process of care management.
Wonderful. Yeah, social support is really key. Having a peer is like excellent social support for addressing mental health problems. So thank you. Randy, I'll hand it over to you for another question.
Thank you. Well, our next question piggybacks on what we've been talking about, mental health and supports in our communities for folks that we work with. But this question is a little more personal, and I'm going to open it up to all our panelists, but also would invite people who are listening in to share in the chat. We all know that secondhand traumas for professionals or families, parents, children, siblings, spouses, working in the field of substance use disorder, or any kind of family traumas can lead to mental and physical issues and health issues. So my question then is, what do you do for self-care and respite while working in this field or in your family situation?
I'll jump on this one since everybody's so excited to share on it. Our department has only really focused on self-care for about 2 or 3 years now. So when I say department, I mean the Utah Department of Corrections. And what brought that on was in like 2 months' time, we had 4 or 5 officers, agents throughout the state that took their lives. And so they've really focused on that. And it's really sad that we have to wait for that to happen before we realize that as officers and people working, in these professions that we suffer trauma to, that we absorb all of this information and we see all this that's happening and we don't let it go. And so it just sticks in our brains, it sticks in our hearts, it sticks in our souls, and we don't. And so it's so, so important that we find a way, that we check in on each other. I think that's probably the thing that has helped me the most, is just having people check in on me, having people that I work with, you know, hey, I see that you're struggling today. What's going on? What can I do to help with that? There's services out there that are there to help first responders and people who are in the criminal justice system that do these things, the juvenile system to help us with that out. But it's so, so important that we check in on others in our profession and our friends and our coworkers to make sure that they're doing okay, because we absorb this and we've got to have an out.
Vida, thank you so much for sharing. And also thank you to Matthew in the chat, who said, I think it's important on your free time to do nothing related to your job. If you read books to relax, don't read books about something that relates to your work. Take time to have a complete break from work, physically, mentally, socially, emotionally. Thank you, Matthew. Someone else, Tom, said to debrief with coworkers often. And Tom, I agree with you. I find that to be really very helpful for me as well. Does anybody else on our panel, we have time for one more response about that before we start wrapping up?
Yeah, I would like to echo what Vida was saying. You know, as a system, we're more aware now, you know, of, you know, the secondary trauma, and, you know, we are putting things in place to help and have more resources, you know, for our staff. With that said, it is still hard, I think, in the juvenile justice system or the correctional system for people to reach out and ask for help. And so the more that we talk about that it's okay, and, you know, how can you gauge where you're at, kind of in that burnout, in symptoms of trauma. And I know our system has developed, you know, these check-in trauma or check-in assessments that staff can just do and see where they're at. And also we've created some peer support internally where people can just reach out to other assigned members throughout the division and just talk. And that person is there to help them, link them up to resources. But I know we can all do a better job of taking care of ourselves in this stressful positions that we have, and, you know, I'm committed to do a better job myself.
Donovan, thank you, and thank you, Vida, and thank you all for adding some great information. I refer all of you to look in the chat. There's some great ideas and supports. Thank you all for participating in this panel, and I'm going to give it back to Erin.
So we were going to open the floor for questions and answers, and we wanted to give a special invitation to anyone who's been involved with the criminal justice system, either someone who's participated in drug court or is a family member of someone who's participated in drug court or any other type of criminal justice system, to also maybe share their experiences or ask their questions. But anyone's welcome to participate. So you can put it in the chat or raise your hand to be unmuted. So if there are no questions, Randy and I prepared. So we had another couple of questions we can ask, but I don't want to step on anyone's toes if they're typing. So I'll ask it. But if you want to put something in the Q&A or the chat, please do. So one of the things Randy and I had talked about was this question, which is that many of us grew up hearing sort of stigmatizing terms like junkie or tweaker, right, to describe people who use drugs, instead of using, you know, medical language like substance use disorder or person first language, of saying people who use drugs, right, instead of drug user or drug abuser, right? Person first language, of course, recognizes the humanity of people who use drugs, tries to treat them with respect. This is how we talk in medicine about this. So I wanted to ask, how do you think the language we use to describe people who use drugs or commit crimes matter? So thinking about the words that we use, how is that important or not important for your job? What are your thoughts around this issue? So Jolynn, I see you unmuted. Go ahead.
I hate it. I'm just gonna say it. I don't like it. And I've often thought as I'm working with these kids, because some days they frustrate me, but I don't know, I think about them as how would I feel if I was their parent? And what, and it's not, and I'm honestly, I'm just speaking with regards to teenagers. But I would hate it as a parent if someone pigeonholed my kid and you know, said that they are even just stupid or a pothead. It would be very heartbreaking. And it's also heartbreaking to hear as a person if I said, well, you know, you're a druggie kid. If I called that person that, I mean, that's so harmful. And it's something that they will never forget. And so when we call the kids that, and they hear that, or their parent hears that, it immediately causes distrust. It damages and sabotages that relationship. And so it's really important to be really careful with your words.
Thanks so much, Jolynn. Are there any sort of conversations happening at your workplace around using, sort of improving the language that's being used?
Yes, and not only with the youth who have substance abuse disorders, but we have other youth that come into the juvenile court, like the gangbangers, not okay. I mean, that kind of stuff is not okay either. Sex offenders, that's not okay. That's not okay either. Like we are having some discussions because we haven't always done great with that. And so that's one area that we're trying to make some improvements on, and making sure that we are, you know, not calling the kids by those names, but making sure that we are referring to them for the great kids that they are. They just have made a couple mistakes.
That's so exciting to hear, Jolynn. I know even in medicine, we're trying to work on this too. We're guilty as well of not always using respectful language. So this is not criminal justice system specific. I also wanted to highlight what Alonzo said. So you sometimes give them permission to be like that when you say things like that, right? You're giving people permission to sort of act in ways that are like not great for themselves, because you're kind of expecting that. It's like a, you know, self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Would anyone else like to add about the language topic and why it might be important in your workplace to work on this? I know, Randy, you kind of had an experience too about adjusting your own language. I don't know if you wanted to share it.
I would. I'd love to. I'll take my moderator hat and put on just the regular attendee hat. Katie gave him my nice introduction, told about my being embedded in the Cache Valley Drug Court. And that was on the invitation of a participant in drug court asked if we would work together, and he guided those efforts. His name is Andrew, and he was really helpful in being my guide. And then a few years later, a colleague of mine, Jennifer Duncan, who's I work with at the library, we wrote an article. And I think going along with what Aaron said to Jolynn, it's in every place, learning to make sure you use first and first language. And when we're writing our article, we were using the language that was given to us, especially by the folks that we were working with and interviewing. And about a few months ago, I used that article in my graduate class. I was teaching an ethnography class, and I went through and reread the article that I co-authored. It was the first chair, and I realized that twice in that article we used non-first person language, and I was pretty horrified. And I recall when we were writing that article that I was uncomfortable with the usage of this term. And so we went back to the publisher, to the editor of the journal, and asked, I asked, could I change that? And of course, you all know that if you've ever published something, that the answer is no. But he said I could do an erratum. And so I did. And I worked with Aaron and Katie and Sandy Sulzer and some of the colleagues in this conference to write and change the thinking about that. And I felt so much better about that. And so I do think it's something that we move through. And, this idea of harm reduction stigma is none of us are perfect. But if we acknowledge that we see something and we learn to do something differently, then we employ that. And I was really appreciative, especially to Erin, because she's such a mentor to me in regards to using first person language. And I hear you, Jolynn, and and everyone on this panel, recognizing that, especially with the people that we had the opportunity to interact with. And so I was just really grateful to learn how to do better.
Thank you for sharing that story, Randy. Yeah, so Randy's article used the term addict, and I think a lot of times people who use drugs refer to themselves as addicts, and so we're using that language back to them. But in medicine, one of the things we've talked a lot about in social science is that we should be modeling good language, respectful language, because sometimes the language people are coming to us with is language that has been used at them in ways that are not always respectful. So it's something I have had to work on. None of us are born knowing these things. We're all learning. We've all made mistakes. Again, so this is an area Randy and I both have learned our own, lessons about, because we didn't always act, the most respectful way in our language either. So that's actually all of our questions. We're right at the 12:51 hour. I don't know if let's hand it back to Katie. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. That was a wonderful conversation. Thank you to all of our panelists for being here today. And this actually kind of segues really well into our next session, where we're going to talk about language some more and learning about gender identity etiquette. So we're going to take a short break and we will see you all back at the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, panelists.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thanks. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A. We just want to make sure they don't get lost, so that we can answer those back in the chat if you would like to. They're for our panelists, so we can follow up with them later. Thank you, everybody.
Sorry, I didn't see those. So Susie, how should we go about getting answers for those?
We can reach out to our panelists because they were both, and maybe we'll try to get those back. At least I'm not sure how to do it, but anyway, we'll figure out a way. We'll just make sure they're acknowledged and then get them back to our attendee list in some form.
Okay, apologies. I didn't see them pop up. Thank you.
They popped right at the very, very end. So good questions, but a little bit right at the end. So thank you, guys.
Thanks. And they are good questions. So again, I hope we can get answers.
Yes, I'm reading them right now. They are great questions. They definitely respond.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm really excited about this next session. We're going to welcome Ray Bailey, who will school us all on gender equity etiquette, which is a very important lesson in today's society. And we've recently seen some great leadership from the governor of Utah on this. Ray says, in order to best serve all members of our community, it is important to treat everyone with respect, including transgender and gender nonconforming individuals. This training provides a basic understanding of gender identity and how to respectfully refer to transgender and gender nonconforming people, including proper use of pronouns. So Ray oversees the youth suicide prevention programs at the Utah Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. And they have a focus on the Salt Lake School District and Northeastern Utah. They also serve as a co-chair of the Utah Suicide Prevention Coalition LGBTQ+ work group, which helps guide state agencies and organizations throughout Utah in preventing suicide for LGBTQ+ Utahns. Thank you so much, Ray, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen real quick. And hopefully you can all see that. All right, so as Katie said, my name is Ray Bailey and my pronouns are they, them. And I'm really excited to talk to you all today about I'm sort of calling it etiquette. So like gender identity, gender equity etiquette, because it really is about respecting other people and showing everyone the same, manners and politeness that we would. And sometimes that looks maybe a little different or uncomfortable for people who aren't as familiar with working with people who are transgender, gender nonconforming. So hopefully this is informative, and I would love to leave some time for questions at the end if that's possible. So yeah. So I wanted to start out by saying that as part of the work that I do for the LGBTQ+ suicide prevention work group, we recently released a suicide prevention plan that is specifically tailored to LGBTQ Utahns, which as far as the research I've done, it's the only plan like this in the entire United States. So that's very exciting, especially for Utah to be at the forefront of this work of understanding the specific ways that we need to work with LGBTQ people in order to sort of mitigate some of those risk factors that may lead to suicide or substance use. And it exists to direct state level agencies or other organizations that are working with LGBTQ people, not specifically just LGBTQ serving, but we all come in contact with LGBTQ people in our lives. So sort of for everybody to use, and has some, I think, useful recommendations for working with this population. And I also want to highlight that there are more resources. There's a statewide campaign right now, suicide prevention campaign called Live On. So if you go to liveonutah.org, there is a under resources, there's a drop down that's LGBTQ, and that's where my work group has been putting resources that we create, and the state plan is there, and then there's other resources from throughout the state and nationally that might be of use. So I just wanted to highlight that resource at the beginning. So when we're talking about gender identity, there's sort of two things that we're probably talking about, gender identity and sex. So, and just to note that for the majority of what I'm going to be talking about, it's primarily a sort of Eurocentric and mainstream US culture, but there are differences in other cultures, and we need to be sensitive to those other differences that might exist in terms of ideas of gender identity. So, gender identity is an individual's deeply held sense of being male, female, or another gender. Here's where we might talk about being cisgender or transgender. And it is something that is culturally specific. So our ideas about gender are rooted in our culture, and those may differ in different places and different communities. And then sex is physical attributes. So it's some combination of external sex organs, sex chromosomes, and internal reproductive structures. And you might hear this referred to as biological sex. All right, so gender identity, as I said, is sometimes thought of as cisgender versus transgender. You may know what transgender is, but cisgender is when your gender identity is the same as your medically assigned gender. So if on your initial birth certificate it says that you are female and you say, yes, I'm a woman, then you would be cisgender. Transgender is when your gender identity is differing from your medically assigned gender. So this could include, I would say the biggest group, which is transgender women or transgender men. So still sort of in this gender binary. And you might also see MTF, which stands for male to female, and FTM, which is female to male. So MTF would be transgender woman, and FTM is transgender man. And then also under this transgender umbrella is non-binary or gender non-conforming. So this is where I would say that I live. I am non-binary, so my gender is neither male nor female, so it can be some combination. And I like to say that personally I feel genderful. I have like an overflowing of gender, but you can also feel like you're neither, like to have no gender, and that's usually referred to as agender. And again, gender identity is cultural and needs to be respected and understood within the context of each community. So what I'm talking about is generally applicable to, I would say, mainstream transgender people in the US. All right, so what is a pronoun? Pronouns are the way, there are lots of different types of pronouns, but they're the ways in which we refer to one another in the third person. And they're integral in expressing who we are to other people. So you may have heard the phrase preferred pronouns, and we really want to move away from using this language because they're not a preference, they're a fact. So if you are a cisgender woman, you don't just prefer to be referred to as she, her. Those are the correct pronouns to express your identity to others. And why should we care? So this is just a couple of a chart from the National Survey of Transgender Adults in America from 2015. And I just want to highlight a couple figures on here. So, and also keep in mind, so I'm from a suicide prevention background, but obviously there's a lot of shared risk and protective factors. So things that I think are noteworthy, 40% of transgender respondents reported having a suicide attempt in their lifetime, compared to 4.6% of the general US population. So although it's a much smaller percentage of the total population, they account for such a huge number of suicide attempts. And then non-medical prescription drug use is 7% among transgender respondents versus 2% of the US population. So definitely at a higher risk for some of these behaviors or things that may happen in a person's life and that we really want to help mitigate. I also wanted to note that these bottom two rows about negative experience related to being transgender in a healthcare setting and not seeking medical healthcare due to being mistreated as a transgender person. It's really scary to go to the doctor as a transgender person often. And I just wanted to note that, you know, like a third of transgender people experience something bad when they are in a healthcare setting. And because they're at risk for suicide and non-medical prescription drug use. We really want to create a healthcare environment that is welcoming to mitigate those risks and have early interventions. So yeah, just to note that it's very common for transgender people to not want to go see a healthcare provider of any kind because they do have negative experiences of being invalidated or experiencing transphobia and some sort of discrimination based on their gender. And not to just be all gloom and doom, I wanted to talk about some protective factors for transgender people. I like to think about what proactively we can do. Obviously, mitigating risk factors is incredibly important, great work, but also thinking about the things we can do and understanding what protective factors exist for transgender people. So having low internalized transphobia. So that means transphobia is like a hatred or sort of discriminatory feelings towards transgender people. And when people have a lower internalized sense of finding transgender people less than or undesirable is a protective factor. Having fewer fears of gender-related rejection. Taking some sort of steps to transition. This could be a lot of different things, but some steps towards transitioning to their the gender that they are from however they've been perceived throughout their life. And then having social support, which is a protective factor across the board, but for transgender people who often experience rejection from their family of origin or their community of origin, having social support is incredibly important and may be lacking for some transgender people. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. If I am, please let me know. Oh, and I see someone asked what portion of the population identifies transgender. I don't know the exact number. It is a small percentage. I'll find that and can let maybe Katie know, or it could be sent out, but it's a very small amount. I think that number has been growing, and I don't think that that means that more people are becoming transgender. I think that it's just a more welcoming, we're trying to create a society that maybe accepts more gender variation. And that's why we're seeing more transgender people and more transgender people feeling confident to be, themselves genuinely in the world. All right, so a little bit about pronouns, sort of the technical aspects. So I know this looks like, your high school language class, but hopefully it's not too confusing. But so we have, if your gender identity is cisgender or transgender woman, potential pronouns would be she, her, hers. So Sally is going to buy herself a new car. For cisgender, transgender men, potential pronouns may be he, him, or his, such as John enjoys swimming with his siblings in the summer. And then for non-binary and gender non-conforming people, the most common that we see here in the US is they, them, theirs, or the pronouns that I use. There's a lot of attempts to create other pronouns that may be applicable. So they're sort of new words. And one of the most common of those is the here, here's. So Alex wants to be an astronaut when they grow up, and Casey washed your hair last night. And this is more for familiarity with these pronouns and how to use them. But we can't assume someone's pronouns just based on their gender identity. Usually those things align, but sometimes people may have a different preference of what pronouns they use and in which context, and in different cultures. All right. So why does it matter to use the correct pronouns? It shows respect to another person, and it validates everyone's identity. And it can signal you being a safe person. So if someone correctly genders me, it makes me feel more at ease and like that this person is a person who's probably not going to be transphobic towards me, or I don't need to fear either social or physical harm from them. So it's a really small thing, but it has a huge impact. All right, so how do I know which pronouns to use? You can't know just by looking at someone. So I think the best thing to do is ask, and normalizing asking what your pronouns are. So you can say, what are your pronouns? You can check someone's email signature if that's how you're communicating with them. So I've seen it increasingly with people that I email with, and I have it in my own email signature. It's really easy to just under your name put the pronouns that you use. So I usually check the pronoun, check to see if there's pronouns in someone's email signature before I might respond to them or refer to them, just so that I know what pronouns to use, and I associate those pronouns with that person. And then you can listen to others. This is the, I think, least the best option, but if you really don't know and you're hearing someone else use pronouns for a person, you can sort of assume that that might be the right pronouns, but I think it's always best to ask and get that information directly from the person. All right, so what if I make a mistake? Just remember that we all make mistakes when speaking, especially if there's language that we're unfamiliar with. So you're not going to get it right the first time, or a lot of the times. I even mess up. I misgender people accidentally sometimes. And it's just sort of, we don't always speak precisely, and that's okay. If you do misgender someone, the best thing to do is apologize and move on. And we normalize all gender identities by not stopping conversations to draw attention to the mistake. So we don't want to single out the person who may use pronouns that may not be expected for them by stopping the conversation and having a whole conversation about it. That can be very stressful to people who are used to thinking about whether their identity is going to be validated, and more than that, if they'll be safe. So all right, so I think that this little cartoon is useful. So when you accidentally misgender someone, you don't want to say she, I mean he, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, I'm the last person who would ever do that. So then you see that the person that they're referring to ends up having to reassure that other person. So saying, oh no, it's okay, it's fine, don't worry about it. And it's really not fine, but this is the socially acceptable thing to do when someone is saying, oh, I'm so sorry. So don't make it a bigger deal by over explaining or over apologizing. Do take the time to correct your mistake and then move on. So yeah, I do think Katie did this in the beginning. So if you say she, sorry, I meant he and I used to. It's that simple. It's very quick. If you feel compelled to say something privately to the person, that's okay, but I still think just normalizing that I just made a mistake in my language, apologize and move on is the most comfortable thing for everyone, I think. All right, so a little bit about names. Some people choose to go by a name that's different from the name that they're given at birth. And some cisgender people also choose to go by names that's different than their birth name. So, but for transgender people, you might hear it referred to as a dead name or a government name. So I would use government name personally if, or legal name if it's on some sort of legal document, and this is how it would be referred to, in some administrative setting. Inappropriate questions about names are, what is your real name and how did you choose your name? Because those can be very personal things to a person about how they chose their name. Asking what their real name is invalidating their identity and saying that you don't believe that the name that they have is actually their true name. And it is their true name. even if it's not on their birth certificate or their ID. So we really want to stay away from invalidating. Even if you think it's just curiosity, it's not really, you're not entitled to that information. That can also sort of out someone, and so expose that they are transgender or something like that. All right, so here's a little rundown of an introduction that I would use that I think that everyone maybe should try and use to adopt something similar to this. So when you're introducing yourself, just saying I'd say my name is Ray and my pronouns are they, them. What pronouns can I use for you? So using someone's correct name and pronouns is a basic sign of respect, and it helps foster trust. So especially in clinical relationships or a healthcare setting, acknowledging that you are going to respect and acknowledge that this other person has pronouns that may be different than what you expect, or just this is what they've told you how they want to be referred. I think that this phrasing can really help make it normal. It's really normal to say your name. And I think it's easiest if you, from the beginning, are associating a name of a person with their pronouns. So when people think of me, they're like, okay, Ray and they, them. And for someone else, it might be, Sharon and she, her, like those things go together. Or Sharon and, they, them. So we don't want to assume what someone else's pronouns are based on our ideas of what a certain gender looks like. And I think this is a really easy, simple, and normal way to ask someone for their pronouns and make it feel natural. All right, so a few more inappropriate questions for transgender and gender nonconforming people. So really anything about sex or their bodies. So like, do you have this genital? How do you have sex? Are you on hormones? Are you going to transition medically? What is your real name or gender? And did you have the surgery? So sometimes people feel entitled to know things about transgender people that we would never ask cisgender people. So these are really personal questions about a person's body, about their medical experiences, and about their private personal life. So even though you might be curious about these things, really try not to ask the transgender person all of these questions. Some transgender people like myself I'm open to having people ask me questions, and I'll try best to answer those for the person, but that's not an expectation we should have of all transgender or gender nonconforming people. And really, I can't imagine asking most of these questions to anyone, so let alone a transgender person. And just to recognize that transgender people often can feel dehumanized and are seen as some sort of weird anomaly, and we're just people. And I feel like sometimes my gender is the least interesting part of who I am. It's important and it's central to me, but it's not like, I don't want to think about it all the time. I don't want it to be the entirety of what people see in me. All right, so how to support LGBTQ plus clients and transgender clients. But these are sort of more applicable broadly. So employing policies that are inclusive of all genders, including paperwork that allows clients to provide pronouns and gender identity if they would like to. Oh, and I do want to say, just having that information on the form, even if a person doesn't feel like that they want to disclose that information, can help someone feel like this is a safe space where they actually respect and understand, that transgender people exist, that non-binary people exist. So it's a small gesture, but it really helps. Provide LGBTQ plus cultural humility training to all your employees. even, you know, people who may not be, if you are in a clinical setting, maybe not just to clinicians, but also, you know, all the staff at an organization, because you all may be interacting with transgender people. And it's just good that we all know and we're all on the same page. And then know and have on hand local and national resources for LGBTQ plus people that you serve, and be prepared to share them with the client. So knowing ahead of time, maybe having a resource list can be really great and can help you get those resources quickly to your client. And I want to say that the Live On website, so liveonutah.org/LGBTQ, has some resources, and there are also resources in the LGBTQ plus suicide prevention plan. But some others that I think are important to know, the Trans Lifeline, which is a crisis line that is run exclusively, all of the operators are transgender themselves. And then the Utah Pride Center, which is a great resource here in Utah that provides mental health care and a ton of community programs that are really awesome. And they also provide cultural humility training for people in different roles like medical professionals or teachers. So I think a really great resource to get familiar with and know what they do. All right, so a few final thoughts here. Just remembering that we all make mistakes when we speak. That we, yes, the Trans Lifeline is a nationwide resource, yes. And I believe possibly on their website, they may also have a chat line so that you don't have to do it. You don't have to talk on the phone if you don't want to. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline is also a great one to know offhand, but just having this other option for transgender folks who maybe in some way their concern is related to gender, so they may want to talk to someone who understands that. Practice. So ask a friend to help correct you when you make a mistake. Not the transgender person whose pronouns you're trying to get right, but another friend. So if you're talking about that person and you make a mistake, ask them to help you check yourself and correct you if you make a mistake. Ask everyone their pronouns, regardless of whether you think that you know someone's gender identity or you assume that you know. So really normalizing that as something that we ask everybody can help gender nonconforming people and transgender people feel less marginalized and less like we are some sort of special case that needs to be handled in a different way. And we do have different needs in some ways, but everybody does have pronouns. And so normalizing that as part of the way that we engage with other people is a great way to show respect to everyone. Don't rely on transgender people you work with to correct you every time. It's very stressful to correct people publicly. It's not something that we, that a lot of people are trained to feel comfortable doing. And sometimes I feel like it's not worth it to do that. So it's a lot of like calculations in the head of the transgender person of like, is this the right time? Should I correct that person right now? Will I have to derail the whole conversation? And really, we would hope that you could help do some of the work of getting those pronouns right. Just like if you were continually calling, you know, someone named Susan, Sharon, and she keeps saying my name is Susan, and you keep saying Sharon, that would get really annoying for her to have to keep doing that. And it feels really disrespectful that you don't care enough about that person to understand a fundamental part of who they are. And then follow the lead of a transgender person. So that person might not be out to everybody. And if you're going into a situation where, you know, maybe the person that you know uses certain pronouns they introduce themselves in a different way, I would say follow their lead, because there's probably a reason why they're doing that in this situation. And that could be for safety or, acceptance, or not wanting to be marginalized in some way. So understanding that we need to, follow what the transgender person does in certain situations. I know that's sort of confusing, but in practice, it's not actually that hard. So yeah, so I hope that that's something that we can all work on doing. Yeah, so it's sort of, we have, I think like 20 minutes or a little less than that for questions. If you do have questions for me, I would love to answer them. Let me, and yeah, provide any extra info to folks. I also saw that someone asked what skill or resources helped you the most to reach children and break their walls of distrust while they enter the justice system, especially when they come from a dysfunctional family. I think being aware that they may be using, understanding the balancing act that child may be experiencing. So if you're able to acknowledge that young person with the name that they want to use, that they're telling you, and the pronouns that they want, and to respect their gender identity with them one-on-one or in the context of, talking to peers. But also understanding and asking them, how do you want me to talk to your parents about this? Because maybe they don't want to do, maybe they understand that they may be having a situation where their parents are not accepting. For people in Utah, I think a great resource can be the Family Acceptance Project. And that has resources for how families can not reject their children who may be gender nonconforming or who are LGBTQ in some way. So yeah, so that has some great just tips of even if a parent is uncomfortable or doesn't understand, or maybe is not on board with their child's gender identity, there are ways that you can still respect your child and make them feel accepted. And that really helps mitigate some of those risk factors. So just showing some sort of support. And there are also specific resources through the Family Acceptance Project that are sort of tailored to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So if that's something that you think might be useful for your clients or anyone that you're working with, I would really recommend that. Randy, I will get that contact information for you with email. So there is also, I gave to Katie, and Katie, I'm not sure if you are sending things out to people, but I put together a quick resource list of some great resources and a site that provides a lot of webinars and sort of resource guides about working with LGBTQ people, and some really great stuff about being more accepting to gender nonconforming youth. So the Family Acceptance Project, I put the link in the chat. And there are posters that you can download for free. I also have them. I have posters of their sort of their tips of how not to reject and how to accept your children. So if anyone wants those for their workplace or to hand out to clients, I have small ones too that would fit on a fridge. Please let me know. I took my contact info down too quickly, but
I think Erin had raised her hand.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a question, Ray. Thank you so much. This was such a great presentation. I wanted to ask, you gave a lot of great advice for kind of how individual providers, that could be social services or healthcare, can kind of do better for transgender people in terms of language, et cetera. I also wanted to ask a couple questions that are related. So one is, how can agencies, so like hospitals or social service agencies, also signal to their community that they're working on this and are going to provide sort of gender affirming care? And then also, how can clinicians or providers working in those agencies kind of push their sort of larger facility or larger group to go that direction? So kind of two questions.
Sure. So first I would say, I know in a lot of EHRs, there is an option, or possibly could be an option put in for a probably preferred name, or the name that the person wants to go by, and then gender pronouns. So if that is an option in the EHR at the place where you work, that's great. And I know that it is hard because documentation doesn't really allow for these variations. And some of it are for reasons of tracking or streamlined record keeping, which is great. I think having some sort of note in that a person may be transgender, or if there's a way to indicate for that person to be maybe aware of their gender identity, but I know that can be difficult. So in terms of clinicians pushing them to have more welcoming facilities, I think the biggest thing is making sure that your staff is educated. So if staff are not, if someone comes in and is transgender and staff are sort of like, I don't know what to do with this, this is something that I can't handle, that's going to feel really invalidating and othering to the transgender person. Sorry, my eyes are watering. I'm not crying. It's just something that my eyes do. So I think everybody having that awareness to begin with can really help young people feel like, or people of any age, to feel accepted if they do feel open to being out about what their gender identity is. I think asking your higher ups, administrators, to consider your policies, and looking at resources like in the LGBTQ plus suicide prevention plan, there's data about suicide rates among LGBTQ people. So I think maybe hopefully like a data driven, if just the being a good person doesn't really fly, the data does support that validating transgender people leads to better outcomes. And I think, so I did also want to say that something to note and to be aware of, and I think it's a powerful statistic to know about, is that when there is anti-transgender legislation going around, calls to the Trevor Project, which is the youth crisis line, increase like big time. That's not like an exact statistic, but they saw a huge influx of calls when there were anti-transgender bills pending, even if those bills were not passed. So thinking about, understanding that we need to be supportive of transgender people, and that there may be a lot of stress that they're experiencing, or older people because of certain policies. Sorry, I went on a tangent here, and I don't know that I fully answered your question, but I just think it's important to remember that transgender youth can be really susceptible to the negative conversations that happen around transgender legislation. So even though in Utah we just had 2 laws that did not get passed that would have been harmful to transgender people here in Utah, just the fact that those bills were being brought up and people were talking about transgender people in ways that were maybe not super educated about transgender people can be really harmful. So I really think that piece about education and making that a policy for all of your staff. So hopefully that was helpful. On the resource list, there's also some great information about workplaces and how to make workplaces more welcoming, and then how to like work with clients to be more welcoming. So those might be helpful guiding documents to share with someone who's like, I don't know how to do this. Other questions? So I hope you did all just learn that it's a simple thing to use someone's pronouns, to respect their gender identity, respect their name. And regardless of what your personal feelings are about transgender people, being able to put those aside and saying, well, this is etiquette. This is how we refer to people in society, and to show respect. And I think that that's a maybe easier way for some people to think about it. That's all we're looking for, is just to be treated, equal, and that includes validating gender identity. So
thank you so much, Ray. I really appreciate that. I learned a lot, and I know other people did as well. And thank you so much for being here. And thank you for your work. This is really important deep work that we need to do as collective members of the society. So thank you, everyone. We have a little bit of time before the next session. So we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping and announcements. So I'm going to find Becca here. Becca, would you take a second to thank our sponsors for the wellness boxes?
Yes, for sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Can you hear me now? Let me see.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I do not have the best service right now. So yes, for your wellness boxes, we do have a few in the mail. So if you haven't received like your swag box / wellness box, they are coming to the first 200 Utah and New Mexico registrants. And we wanted to thank our sponsors. We are so appreciative for the sponsors that ended up donating. So the Resource Center, Tribal and Rural Opioid Resource Center donated, the Heart Team of Utah donated, Northeastern Counseling Center in Vernal and Roosevelt, Utah donated, the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, the Utah Rural Opioid Healthcare Consortium, USU Create Better Health, Uintah County 4-H, and the Ute Indian Tribe Alcohol and Substance Use Prevention Program went above. I want to send a special thanks out to them for their donations. They gave us an incredible amount of donations and items. It made our box so incredible. So I want to send a special thanks for the amount of items that they donated. And like I said, reach out to any of them with any of the information that's included on there. And we, like I said, we really, really do appreciate all the donations we received.
Thanks so much, Becca. It's really been wonderful working with so many people to pull everything together, and we had almost 60 panelists and presenters, and so many people were involved in planning the summit. We have a huge advisory board that met a bunch of times to pull all this together for you. So I just want to thank everybody that has put in so much work and effort to get this summit pulled together, and it's really been an honor working with everyone. Now I'm going to hand it over to Kara Murray to talk about the Goose Chase.
Thanks for that. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for such a wonderful summit. I thoroughly enjoyed it and learned a lot in the process as well. It was great. I'd like to thank everybody that participated in the Goose Chase. I loved looking through all of the submissions and seeing the different missions completed. It was a lot of fun. If you're interested and you did participate, you can still go back in there. The game is closed, but it is still open to look through the different submissions that were in there and just kind of go through it, see what people submitted. So now we'd like to announce the winners. So we actually have a tie for first place with 13,200 points is Miss Goose and R42. And in third place with 11,200 points, we have Margot B. So congrats to you winners. We have a prize for you. If you will just email me at Cara, CARA.Murray, MURRAY, at usu.edu, we will be sure to get you your wonderful prizes. So thanks again for everybody for this amazing conference.
Thanks so much, Kara. That was a lot of fun. That was my first goose chase, so I really enjoyed that. And thank you for setting it up. All right. We have a few minutes, so I would love it if everyone would take some time to do a little stretching, get some water, just get your body feeling better, and we will be back shortly with our closing session. Thank you so much.
Hey everybody, just a quick reminder, we've got about 5 minutes left in our break. So we'd love to hear a little bit from you about kind of the things that you've learned or what you're going to take away from the summit. So if you get a sec to share in the chat box kind of what is one most valuable thing you've learned this week, and then one thing that you're going to change in your personal or professional life after the summit, that would be awesome. Thanks, and we will reconvene in about 5 minutes.
Okay, we're back. It is my pleasure to bring you a special guest to close our summit this year. Dr. Ken White, Vice President of Utah State University Extension. So Dr. Kenneth L. White has been a faculty member in the Department of Animal, Dairy, and Veterinary Sciences at Utah State University since 1991. Prior to this, Dr. White was a member of the faculty in the Department of Animal Science at Louisiana State University. He is currently Vice President for USU Extension, Dean of the College of Agriculture and Applied Sciences, and Director of the Utah Agriculture Experimental Station at Utah State University. He received his Bachelor of Science in Animal Science from Brigham Young University in 1979 and his master's degree in Animal Science and PhD in Physiology from the University of California, Davis in 1982 and 1986, respectively. He has been actively involved in directing a competitive research program throughout his 32-year academic career, including a new current USDA NIFA award in 2017. As an independent researcher, he has generated over $15.5 million in extramural funding to support research in animal reproduction and embryonic development. In 2006, he was recognized as Researcher of the Year. In 2007, he was honored as Undergraduate Mentor of the Year, and in 2011 as Utah State University's Outstanding Graduate Mentor. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed scientific articles in journals such as Science, Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, Development, Biology of Reproduction, Molecular Reproduction and Development, Cloning, and Stem Cells. Congratulations on that. He led the nuclear transfer cloning team that produced the world's first clone equines, which resulted in the birth of 3 identical mule foals. He has also been invited to speak at symposia in various countries, including China, Thailand, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, Peru, Argentina, Brazil, and Ireland, in addition to many universities throughout the USA. As an administrator, he was one of the primary leaders responsible for establishing the USU School of Veterinary Medicine and the Utah Water Extension Initiative and other significant new extension and experiment station funding initiatives. Under his leadership, the USU College of Agriculture and Applied Sciences has experienced double-digit growth in student enrollment and is at an all-time high in total numbers of students and scholarships awarded. USU Extension has also experienced a record amount of extramural funding received and program expansion during his tenure as vice president. The Utah Agricultural Experiment Station has experienced record levels of faculty research productivity, expansion of resources, and significant upgrades to infrastructure to meet future research needs during the same period and into the future. Dr. White is joining us today to offer closing remarks and officially wrap up the 2021 Intermountain Tribal and Rural Opioid Wellness Summit. Dr. White, we sincerely appreciate your leadership and taking your time out of your schedule to join us today. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Can you hear me all right?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that very kind introduction. So I really appreciate the opportunity to close this 4th conference. And I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about what's gone on in the history of the efforts that USU Extension has made to expand health and wellness resources throughout the state of Utah. Extension, maybe USU Extension, may be a new organization to some of you, but it's actually been a community-based organization. It was first created by federal legislation in 1914. So it's been an organization that's been around for over 100 years, and certainly in the early stages of extension, cooperative extension, there was a great focus on enhancing agricultural productivity, as well as issues with youth leadership through 4-H programs and consumer science programs throughout state and region. All dependent on that strong partnership between the land-grant university and the local county within the state. And this has been a partnership that has, as I said, been going on for over 100 years. Now, obviously today, extension is much more than what it was in those early days. And certainly we have really expanded the areas that we have worked in over the past several years. Certainly one of the areas when I first was appointed to this position back in 2013 that I realized was going to be a very important area for us to expand was the area of health and wellness. And certainly that first summer that I was appointed, I actually visited all of the county offices and in the state of Utah, and visited with our county faculty members. And at that time, there were some faculty, a couple of names that come to mind are Susie Prevedel, which has certainly been a participant and a strong force in this summit, but also Cindy Nelson from Beaver County had ongoing health and wellness programs in their community. And certainly that was also a period of time when I think many of our awareness of some of the issues around opioids were becoming more and more familiar to us, and as well as other issues that involve both health, mental as well as physical well-being, and so we started to look in ways in which we could expand our ability to have an impact on health and wellness in the state of Utah. And in fact, we wrote a grant, a pretty substantial grant in 2014 to try and increase the number of participants. I did this in conjunction with collaborators at the state health department, as well as a couple of colleagues at the University of Utah, with the idea of creating a stronger, more organized extension health and wellness system that basically looked to target the issues surrounding opioid dependency throughout the state of Utah. And so from those early stages, we were able to initiate this. We weren't funding it a grant, but through a number of retirements in the extension system, and certainly one that was a key component in launching a much more expansive program in health and wellness was a retirement in the Emma Eccles College of Education, where we had the retirement of an extension position that I believe was formerly a kind of a family money management position. And I had a conversation with the dean of that college at the time, which was Dean Beth Foley. And we together decided that we would redirect that position to be a specifically address create a high extension position that focused on health and wellness. And I added some extension funding to that salary, and she added some teaching funding to that salary, and we created the position that after a nationwide search, we hired Dr. Sulzer into that position. At the same time, I used additional funding, again, through retirements, and created 5 new positions in that specifically targeted communities, nine counties where opioid dependency was clearly a major issue. And we brought on all those 5 positions, and what resulted was the HEART team. And certainly there are other acronyms of teams that have been created. And since that time, we brought on those extra faculty in 2018, and certainly our president in her address in 2019, describing where we were as a university, certainly one of the highlighted areas that she focused on was to expand our outreach efforts to the citizens of Utah within the areas of health and well-being. And certainly we've expanded what we deliver to the beyond just focusing on opioid issues, but have also brought on programs that focus on some issues surrounding mental health issues, and particularly in mental health of our youth. And certainly one of the hallmarks of extension is that we are really good partners. And so as we've gone and tried to expand our footprint in helping increase awareness and provide resources in the area of health and wellness, we've helped build and provide some of those. There you'll see several listed here, web pages that have resources that can be utilized to help deal with some of the issues, or that are tools to help deal with some of the issues in health and wellness. And certainly this next slide provides a very good summary of some of the very important things that you have seen in this current 2021, which is, again, I think I already mentioned or has been mentioned several times before, is our fourth installment in this health and wellness, opioid health and wellness summit. So again, this has been a very important area for us to play in and to become partners with others to help provide tools and access to tools and provide resources, particularly in rural areas. I think USU, more than any other institution in the state, is really recognized for the efforts that we make to provide outreach in our rural communities. Oftentimes we look at our rural communities, and sometimes they have access to fewer tools and resources than what folks on the Wasatch Front or in some of those more urban areas will find. But we certainly are one institution in Utah that has made a very conscientious and strategic effort, which is fully in line with our mission as the state land grant university, to provide outreach to our rural partners in those rural communities. Certainly, I'd be remiss if I didn't invite all of you, as well as all of your colleagues and any other folks that you can get the word out, to please join us in 2022 for the Intertribal Opioid Wellness Summit. We ask that you widely make this known that we're going to reconvene. Our hope and frankly, our expectation is that in 2022, we'll be able to do this in a more normal format, normal being defined as face-to-face, so that we could share the interactions, the personal interactions that we've had in past summits. So again, please put that on your calendar as something to watch for, and certainly we'll be providing far more information about this in the coming months. Finally, I think it's important to make sure that I thank the sponsors of the Rural Health, it's through the sponsors that we're able to do these things. And so without these sponsors, this would not be possible. So specifically, I'd like to thank and acknowledge the Rural Health Association of Utah, the State Opioid Response Office at the Utah Department of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, and the many researchers and community partners who kindly presented timely information to you this week. With their contributions, we are truly bridging harm reduction and recovery. I also would like to thank the Wellness Box community partners who contributed the fun goose chase and lunchtime activity and the summit materials and swag. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't thank a couple of very important people. I'd like to give a shout out to Katie Zuman, the summit coordinator, Carrie Warnick, the Zoom tech producer, and Jennifer Petros, the marketing team leader, and all the Troy team members and community partners for producing this online event. As any of you may know, as those of you who've been involved in producing these things, it looks simple, but it's really not. It takes a lot of people with a lot of energy, a lot of skills, and a lot of talent to be able to put this thing together and have it go as seamlessly as what this wellness summit has gone via Zoom. So thank you all for participating. Thank you for those that have made this possible. And certainly I'm very happy to see that we're in the 4th and we'll soon transition to the 5th Wellness Summit next summer. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to close this out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ken. We really appreciate you being here today to help us close this out. And I will just say, it's been great. I've had an opportunity to hear from and learn from so many great partners and resources, and hopefully our participants have enjoyed this as well, this learning opportunity. And so thanks so much, Niall. Thanks to our team, Katie, Claire, Jennifer, and everybody behind the scenes. You're right, there are many more people behind the scenes, a lot of volunteers who helped us with each session. And so at this point, I am going to turn the time back over to Claire. And again, thank you, everybody. And thank you to all of our participants for joining with us through this beautiful May weather. I'm staying on Zoom for one more week, so we're hoping to finish that up. So thanks. I know Claire and Katie have a few housekeeping things to finish us off. Thank you so much, everybody.
Great, thanks Susie and Katie and everyone for attending today. We're really happy to have had you with us for the past couple of days. Just a couple of quick reminders, announcements, housekeeping, whatever you want to call it. We do have an evaluation survey that we would love all of you to fill out that will help us figure out kind of how things went, what we can improve next year for our conference. And then if you are requesting CEU credits, we have another form to fill out for that, just so we can get your contact information and the correct documentation to you. So I'll put those back in the chat box. Please, please take a look at those. We do have a couple of gift cards for 3 people who fill out the evaluation survey. So fill out the survey, you might win a gift card. So please take a couple minutes to do that. And then thank you for all of those who shared in the chat things that they've learned and plan to change after this week. I've been very inspired reading your messages. I'd love to hear from more of you. So if you get a sec before you head out today, please do take a minute to just tell us what you've learned, what you plan to change, what your favorite thing was about this week. And then other than that, please do get next year's summit on the calendar. We're hoping to do it in person and meet everybody face to face again. So thank you. And I will turn that back to you, Katie.
Thanks so much, Claire. If anyone wants to be on the community advisory board for next year, just reach out to me. We'd love to have you. Thank you, Dr. White. Thank you, Susie. Thank you to all of our wonderful speakers, our sponsors, and especially to all of our participants. We value your support so much, and we appreciate your efforts to help reduce stigma and harm, and your interest in creating successful recovery communities wherever you are. It takes all of us working together to make our society and our communities better. On behalf of the USU Office of Health Equity and Community Engagement, we hope you have enjoyed your time with us this week. If you are interested in learning more about any of these topics that we discussed or any of our community outreach programs, please reach out to us. Our website is khs.usu.edu/outreach, and we can be reached by email at healthequity@usu.edu. again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and weekend.